Can I welcome Assembly members and members of the public, both here and watching on webcast, to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Committee. Our main item of business today is a question and answer session with the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. But first, we have a few short items of formal business to go through before we begin this discussion. Members of the public may like to follow us on Twitter at London Assembly and take part in the meeting discussion using hashtag #AssemblyPolice. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to a silent mode to avoid any unnecessary interruptions this morning. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Can I ask our clerk, Jonathan Baker, if any apologies have been received for today's meeting?
Chair, apologies for absence have been received from Assemblymember Copley, Assemblymember Duval and Assemblymember O'Connell.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Thank you. Can I also ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests and other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality, which are not reflected on the authority's register of gifts and hospitality, where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? None? Thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meetings of the Police and Crime Committee held on the 22nd of January and the 5th of February this year to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Item 4, list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee as listed in the report? Thank you. Item 5, response to the committee's letter on sexual offences and rape. Can I ask the committee to note the response from the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime to its letter on sexual offences and rape as attached at Appendix 1 to the report? Thank you. So we now come to our main item of business, which is a monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. And I would like to welcome our guests, the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Sophie Linden, and Assistant Commissioner Nick F. Grave. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Perfectly, thank
and
you.
I think this is the first time that you come to the meeting of this committee.
In this role, that's correct.
In this role, yes. We last met at Notting Hill Carnival last.
Yes, that's right.
So we do have a series of questions to ask you about a number of issues. But I think you, Assistant Commissioner, if I can spend 10 to 15 minutes asking you questions about an item that has been added to the agenda at the very last minute, which is about the events of August 29th last year, when senior civil servant Ms. Sonia Khan was asked to leave Downing Street. Can I make it very clear the questions I'm going to be asking you are solely about how the police acted that day? So, and I believe that you are aware of this question.
I'm sorry, Chair. We have very important problems to discuss which affect all Londoners. This is an amazingly trivial, minor matter which occurred ages ago.
I hear your...
And the matter, as Coast, why should the GLA and the Deputy Mayor for Policing need to spend time on dealing with these matters?
I hear what you're saying, Tony. I don't share your view, so I will now ask you my questions. So, Assistant Commissioner, just setting the scene generally, if an officer were to be called inside number 10 to assist with an incident, who would give the authority for an officer to be removed from their post and to be sent to assist? Who holds the authority to direct number 10's internal security custodians to instruct your officers on what to do? Just tell us the general sort of position.
In general terms, Chair, of course.
Sorry, can you...
In general terms, Chair, we don't discuss security arrangements in sensitive premises. You understand
the way
that.
to deal with it.
But in general terms, police officers are encouraged to act on their own initiative and their discretion and to deal with incidents as they see as unfolds in front of them. And that's what the officer, as I understand it, did on this occasion. He was asked to assist with a small matter. He assisted, and that was the end of the issue.
I'm coming to that, but I still got to establish a general position. In what circumstances can a Metropolitan Police Service officer remove government-issued security clearance and passes from an official? Under whose authority can they do this?
I've no idea whose authority is required to remove passes. I imagine the pass issuer is the authority for removing passes. My understanding is that the pass that the member of staff had was required to be surrendered because their employment had ceased.
The employment has ceased?
Well, I wasn't there, of course, Chair. My understanding
You
is...
were not there, but you surely must have been briefed. There have been reviews carried out. I shall be asking you questions about the review as well.
I can tell you what I know. Maybe that's the best way to approach this. What I know...
Sure, tell us what you know.
What I know is that the officer that was outside number 10 Downing Street as part of their standard duty was asked to step inside to assist escorting Ms Khan, who's the member of the person we're talking about, out of the Downing Street complex because she ceased to have a pass and couldn't operate the gate.
Hold on.
That's fair enough.
Hold on.
That is a fair enough comment.
Sorry.
Close it down.
I'm asking the questions, please. I did not interrupt. Can you just bear with me? Sorry, there's something...
This really is...
Right. Can I actually ask you? You said asked to assist. So who gave the instruction for an armed officer to enter number 10 Downing Street, remove some of Ms Sonia Khan's security passes and escort her from inside 10 Downing Street to the Horse Guards exit of Downing Street? You said asked to assist by who?
As I understand it, the officer at number 10 Downing Street is there to provide security and facilitate number 10 Downing Street's business as far as the security is concerned. As I understand it, this person required to be escorted out because they no longer had a pass, which is standard security procedure, and couldn't have operated the gate at the end of the road. Therefore, the officer was asked if they could assist, which is what they did.
Sorry. I'm not criticizing the individual officer.
No, I appreciate
What I'm
that.
trying to establish, Assistant Commissioner, is the line of command. That armed officer entered the building under someone's instructions. There must be some sort of accountability. Was it a police officer who asked this particular armed officer to enter the building? Did they take authority from someone? Who?
My understanding is an official from Downing Street, an official, I don't know who, asked the officer to step inside to assist. I can offer you no more information
Sure.
at this stage than that.
I think you answered my question, an official, and I will leave it at that. Right? As I said, my questions are solely about how the police acted that day. Wider issues, I'm not interested, it's not the remit of this committee. We're looking at the policing that day. So just moving on. Sir Steve House, there was a press release issued by the Met, and Sir Steve House has subsequently admitted that there were some untruths in the press statement issued by the MPS on the 30th of August 2019. As contrary to the statement, the officer involved in the incident did indeed enter 10 Downing Street on 29th August.
What's your agenda on
Yeah.
this? This is
I just-
preposterous.
I'm going to ask my questions, and I do resent. Can I ask committee assembly members to show the chair some respect? I'm going to proceed with my line of questioning.
We are
and if you don't like
entitled
it,
to say
well,
whether
you
we
can,
think you are
but
in
you should,
order
you
or
should
not.
You should not be interrupting my line of questioning.
No.
You can ask your questions later. So I'm going to carry on this. So, Assistant Commissioner,
Outrageous.
Ms. Khan contests that there are further discrepancies in the Met's account of what happened on that day. Do you therefore feel it would be most appropriate to conduct another review of what occurred on the 29th of August, including gathering witness statements from those who saw what occurred inside 10 Downing Street? You heard one review already, which you say has been fully reviewed, but if you can tell us what that review entailed, but more importantly, in the light of, as we now know, untruths in the press statement issued the 30th of August, an armed officer did enter Downing Street. Don't you feel the need now to have another review, to take witness statements of people who were inside Downing Street? You were not there, I wasn't there, none of the committee members were there. We need to know what happened inside that building.
No, we
No, we
don't.
don't.
Well, some of us do.
Chair, it's hard for me to answer in detail, but it seems to me, forgive me if this is simplistic, it seems to me fairly commonsensical that an officer who is at Downing Street in order to provide security is asked to assist in escorting somebody who no longer has a pass.
But that's precisely what I'm trying to establish. Officers who instructed, well, you already answered that question, but there must be something in your review to prevent something like this happening again. When an armed officer is called to assist, the Joe Blogs out there, certainly somebody like myself would think, what's happened? An armed officer being involved in an incident? Has someone been attacked? Has there been some untoward incident?
The reason the officer is armed is not because of what happened at Downing Street, but because all officers who are involved in protective security in the Palace of Westminster are armed.
An armed officer, let me make this very clear. I'm not criticizing the individual officer in question. What I'm trying to establish is I learned some lessons from this incident. That who gave the authority? Surely there must be a line of command. It is fairly serious. This is, it seems to me this is a straightforward human resources issue. There are procedures in this building, for instance, if someone has to be asked to leave the building.
These things happen.
No.
My understanding is that it was a straightforward request for assistance, and our job is generally to facilitate requests such as that, which appeared reasonable in the circumstances. In terms of sort of deployment of resources, it was a very short-lived incident, in my understanding, a matter of minutes, and a perfectly reasonable request, in my view,
Indeed.
that was made.
A perfect reasonable. It might be a short incident, which is certainly has had consequences for Ms. Khan. Do you acknowledge that your actions with regard to this incident contributed towards Ms. Khan receiving a torrent of vile abuse, including death threats, and have significantly damaged her professional reputation?
Disgraceful.
The police are aware of that. She has had death threats. She has been a subject of vilification on social media. You are aware of this. Do you feel that your actions that day contributed to what happened, to what has happened to her, and the damage to her professional reputation?
This is
my question is to the officer.
Asking questions about an
Please do not obstruct
individual
please do not obstruct my line of questioning.
No. You are wrong,
Right,
Chairman.
I'll put the question to you, Assistant Commissioner. Right. Do you accept that your actions that day did not help, and that Ms. Khan, as you are well aware, has received a torrent of violent abuse, as I've said, message on social media and death threats, and her professional reputation has, in her opinion, certainly been damaged?
I think if we hadn't have assisted Miss Khan, she'd have been wandering up and down Downing Street unable to get out, which probably would have been worse.
Exactly.
Well, no. Right. The press briefing that you now accept was wrong, right? Right. She could have. Well, yes, she was escorted to the Hoscard Road exit of Downing Street. But what I'm just trying to establish is how your actions contributed to what happened subsequently.
Well, I'm not fully briefed on the issues that you refer to that Miss Khan has suffered. I'm very sorry to hear that she has received those kind of unpleasant communications, and clearly we'll need to understand what those are, and if there's a crime alleged, then we'll investigate it. But I'm unaware and unable to comment about whether or not the escorting of Miss Khan from Downing Street to the exit at Horse Guards contributed in any way to that behaviour.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly pleased that you acknowledge that you personally feel that.
You're putting words into
no,
his
you did
This
say,
is
you
abuse
did
of
say
process.
that you feel sorry about what
Chairman,
happened to her.
this is
So I
abuse.
think I will leave it at that.
Not on.
Any other questions?
Follow
No?
up in writing.
Thank you. Right, we now move
if you
to
need to.
the first item on the agenda as printed. Sexual offences. Who's going to lead on that? Susan,
I'm leading, and Chair, this is so unlike you.
Yeah.
This is so unlike you.
Well, no,
because there's an agenda here somewhere which I haven't quite worked out.
Assembly Member
but
Hall, your questions are on sexual offences.
Yes, because
right?
these are important
We have now
issues.
moved on. Can
Very,
you please ask your questions?
You're running the meeting
Can you please ask your
badly.
questions? That's
Right,
your opinion.
Okay.
I don't think that's shared by other
I'm
people.
going to ask a question of you both, and obviously these are important issues. Can you explain why reports of sexual offences and rape have increased so dramatically over the last few years, while successful prosecutions are almost non-existent?
Do you want
So
me to lead?
who's that to?
Both of you, whichever one of you wants to take that on first, I'd be happy to hear the answer.
Thank you. Well, it's absolutely correct that rape and serious sexual offences, which we refer to by the unfortunate acronym of RASO, but I'll use that as a shorthand if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Those category of offences have risen dramatically over the last decade or so. In recent 12 months, maybe 18 months, certainly in the Metropolitan Police, and I believe this is replicated in many other forces, there has been a slight levelling off of those offences. But there has been absolutely been a dramatic rise. I think there are a number of factors that have driven that rise. I think, firstly, the police service has worked very hard with other agencies and third sector organisations to try and improve the confidence of victims of RASO offences to come forward, confident in the knowledge that their allegations will be taken seriously and will be robustly investigated. So we've worked really hard to drive that confidence agenda, and I think that has contributed to people being able to come forward and report. I think the second thing that's happened is that the whole sort of debate around rape and serious sexual, particularly, you know, the historic offending that's now coming to light, has brought this into the public eye much more than it ever was, and I think that has also contributed to a willingness, or more of a willingness for people to speak out about what happened to them, both recently and historically. So I think those two things have happened. Thirdly, I think the police service is much more rigorous now, and this has been a process been going for the last 10 years at least, in its crime recording accuracy. So I think that has assisted also in getting a true picture of the problem or the offending that we see in this country. So I think all of those things have contributed to the rise. In terms of the declining detection rate, it's clearly a huge concern to the police service. We talk about it a lot, both in the Metropolitan Police Service and nationally. There's a national lead, Simon Bailey, in Norfolk, who's a chief there, that works relentlessly on trying to reverse this decline. But there are a number of very complicated factors that have driven that decline. The most obvious one, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, is the tension that exists for an investigator between fulfilling their obligations under the Criminal Procedure Investigations Act, the disclosure obligations, and protecting where they can the private life and privacy of the complainant or victim. And there's a very real tension between those two duties. This was brought even more into focus, as you'll remember, in the winter of 2017, when a number of rape cases failed to proceed based on failures around disclosure. The most often quoted one is R.V. Allen, which was a Metropolitan Police case, but there were many others, not just in the Met, but up and down the country. And what that revealed was that the police service hadn't understood properly its duties under disclosure and therefore was not affording the best chance of a fair trial, which of course is what we're all interested in, a fair trial and justice being done. And add to that the complication that the growth, exponential growth really, in the use of mobile phones and particularly but digital devices to record one's actions and thoughts and communications has added to the burden of a disclosure duty enormously. It's very, very difficult to sort of get a sense of the scale of this issue. The best thing I can give is, if you take a typical smartphone, it's got something like 256...
We're going to talk about the RT a bit more.
Okay, it's a very this is one of the drivers for the falling in conviction detection rates, because part of the work, if you want to talk about digital later, I'll park that for now, but part of the drive to improve disclosure has resulted in the CPS quite rightly being more stringent in their requests of officers at an earlier stage in the investigative process. So now officers are expected to have completed much more disclosure work before a decision to charge is given. And that inevitably slows down the investigative process, because apart from the issue around digital material that can be take a while to recover and analyse and present, you also have the factor, which has grown exponentially as well, of third-party material being potentially relevant. So this could be doctors' records, it could be adult social care, children's social care, school records, any number of other organisations that hold data about the individual or the complainant that may, depending on the circumstances of the offence and the what the suspect has said and a whole number of other elements, may become relevant in terms of disclosure. So I'll stop at that point, because I've said quite a lot, and I'm very happy to explore any of those areas further.
Could I just add, in terms of the work...
Yes, please. I mean, if you could address both the issues. Yeah. I mean, I'll put it this way. For as long as I've been involved, and domestic violence I was involved in Harrow, as in I got interested. So for as long as I've been involved in this, it's always been told to me that the reason the numbers are going up is because we can report it better. And I accept that to an extent, but we can't say that forever. So that's the one part. And really, I'm looking for answers as to what you're going to do about the fact that successful prosecutions are almost non-existent. What are we doing about that? Because I'm thinking of the victims here.
So if I could just sort of answer that in two parts of what we know and what we're going to do about it. In terms of the reporting, there has been an increase in confidence, but you'll also know that MOPAC did quite a focused piece of work into why have we seen the reports going up. In the Beneath the Numbers report, which was published.
Yes, I'm asking you on that in a minute.
Yeah, in the Beneath the Numbers report. Some of it was about the Operation Nutri, when you could see an increase in reporting after Operation Nutri. A lot of historical cases of sexual violence and abuse came forward then and at that point. But the Beneath the Numbers report also shows that actually one of the things that has driven the increase in recording is the ability and the Met's crime, the way that they are recording crime has really, really improved. The crime data integrity has improved. So it is actually also down to much better recording of those incidents, those women who are coming forward, and that they are being treated in the right way. Victims Commissioner Claire Waxman has done a lot of work, as has the Met, in terms of looking at what's happening to the cases of when women come forward to report rape in particular. Why have we seen such a drop in cases? Disclosure is absolutely part of it, but actually the report and the in-depth analysis that the Evidence and Insight team did and was published by Claire Waxman with recommendations was pre the issue of disclosure, and we still saw that real drop-off in prosecutions. And that was about victim support, the real importance of ensuring that victims have the right support through the process, around video evidence, early evidence kits. She had a number of recommendations that had been taken forward through the Rape Gold Group, which is chaired by Assistant Commissioner Mark Simmons. There is a lot of work being undertaken here, and there is a second phase of the rape review that Claire and MOPAC, Evidence and Insight team, will be undertaking to really do that deep dive into cases now as to how much of it is being driven by the burdensome and often, from the victim's point of view, invasion of privacy in terms of the disclosure and the amount of records and digital evidence that they are having to hand over. There is that review is just starting now. It will take a little bit of time in terms of a real deep dive into the cases to really understand at what point are the real problems around disclosure, what might be done to help and to support that disclosure process, because there's clearly, you know, there's the process of justice, and you do have to have disclosure, but it has to be done in an appropriate and proportionate way.
Okay, that deep dive review you're talking about now, what's the name of that?
It's the second phase of the rape review. The first phase has been published, and the recommendations from Claire Waxman have been published. The second phase is to look at more recent cases. I think they'll be looking at about 400 cases, which will make sure that they can pick up the issues of digital disclosure, which wasn't such a big issue in the first rape review, because it was pre the digital evidence.
Okay, so when are they going back to?
Pardon?
What's the date of those reviews?
So I think that's over from 28. I can come back to you with the dates, but it's the more recent cases that will pick up the issues of digital evidence and digital disclosure. So we'll have a much better view of what is causing the problems around digital disclosure, and also Claire will be able to give recommendations as to how to try to support victims in the process when they do have to disclose, and when the evidence is needed, either for the prosecution or for the defence, because we clearly have to be a fair trial and fair disclosure.
Okay, given all the different things, because my colleague, Assembly Member Pidgeon, is going to go into the digital aspect of this more, given these various things that you're looking at, when can we hope to be sitting in this committee, or whoever is sitting in this committee, to start to see prosecutions going up?
So one of the other things I would say is it's not just the review of the rape cases and the recommendations around that. There has been a lot of work and also a lot of investment into the services that support victims of sexual violence when they are brave enough to come forward. We have had an increase in independent sexual violence advocates. We have the new London Victims and Witnesses Service, and we have also invested in rape crisis centres and the havens. All that is a part of the process of trying to ensure that victims have the support they need, because we know that victims are falling out of the process because they haven't had the appropriate support. We are investing in it. Your question as to when will that start to make a difference? Yes. I would hope that the Rape Gold Group will start to see a change, and there's a real focus on this at the moment through the Rape Gold Group. You'd start to see that change, but in terms of an a real step change, as soon as possible, but it will take time because these are complicated and difficult issues, and it is multi-agency.
I understand all that. I'm just looking for some hope here for these victims. So give me a rough idea on when are you projecting that this will start to make a difference?
As I said, this is multi-agency. Part of the process as well is
I
around
know all of
CPS
that.
and finding the issues.
I'm just,
all I can say, Susan, genuinely, I'm not trying to. As soon
Sophie,
as possible, because
problem
from my
is,
view, it is so important that victims get justice.
Sophie, I
and those that
understand.
are so
Every one of
dangerous.
us understand all of this. The problem we have is that we can't ever get dates out of any of the mayoral team for anything. You won't ever tell us when you're hoping to get something done by. If something happens and therefore you can't deliver, then we're here to listen to reasons. But we cannot get answers to anything as to when you think something is going to make a difference.
So
Throwing all these different things in is applaudable, and we're really happy because this is a very serious situation. However, we want to have hope on the horizon. So just give us a broad brush look at when you think...
So my broad brush look at when I want to see different change is from now and as soon as possible. In terms of optimism, the independent sexual violence advocates are there and in place. The rape crisis centres have had their waiting lists opened because of the Mayor's investment. So the change and the difference that makes to victims is now. Can I promise that will immediately make a step change? It is difficult to know. We are doing all we can to push this through as quickly as possible. I'm not prepared to give you sort of arbitrary dates, which we don't know that can be met, when what we are doing is focusing on this as really, really intensely. You've got a rape gold group, you've got a lot of work from the Victims Commissioner. We have also got an issue with making sure the CPS do their role and the courts do their role in the right way. So adding all that together, we expect and we want really quick progress and as soon as possible. And Nick chairs the London Crime Justice Board, which is looking at all the other aspects around case file quality and driving change there as well.
Okay, so have you got any standards that you are holding the Met to? Have you got any timelines that you are going to hold the Met to that this will start to work? Because if not, if we say as soon as possible can go so quickly, and suddenly 5 years down the line, as soon as possible hasn't got there, and you haven't got any metrics in place to say we really need to be at this level at this stage.
Well, we have metrics, we have performance management in place, as does the Met, as operational performance management in place around that. We know what the detection rates at the moment, and they are woefully low at 3% at the moment of prosecution rates for rape. That is woefully low. What we do is we chart progress, and we can see what the progress needs to be. There is no sense that there is not a focus on trying to improve and drive change. What you're asking for is to pick arbitrary numerical targets out of the air. I'm not prepared to do that because I don't want to skew the work that is happening. No,
we actually just want a yardstick upon which we can look at and hope that you've got some sort of metrics that you're holding them to, because if all of your aims are around as soon as possible and we hope for, none of us have got anything that we can actually judge you by. And I do wonder how you judge if you're looking at it. As soon as possible is, yes, we all hope that, but we often have to keep to targets. What progress has been made in taking forward the recommendations in the Beneath the Numbers report?
So the Beneath the Numbers report was not a report that had specific recommendations. It was analysis of...
Really?
Well, it was an analysis of what is happening with recorded and reported incidents, and you might have done as I did, had a look back at it today and in the preparation for this committee, that it was really about what is happening and an analysis of that. And as I've said previously, what it shows is that the increase in recorded incidents is, the evidence there is mostly about an improvement in crime data integrity. What there has been is recommendations of the rape review that Claire Waxman published, as I've discussed, and that was published in the autumn. So there is now an action plan in place, and part of that is through the Rape Gold Group that the improvements in that is being driven.
Yes, the committee wrote to you recommending that MOPAC report back to the committee by December 2019 with its plans to address the issues identified in Beneath the Numbers.
And the rape review is part of taking that forward, and the recommendations in the rape review around better victim support, more trauma-informed approach with a training for officers, which has been taken forward, and also some of the issues around guidance has been taken forward, and also, you know, some of the issues that we know is happening around rape. The lack of prosecutions in rape is not only to do with the police, but to do with the CPS as well. We have been calling consistently for a joint inspection of the police and the CPS in rape cases, so that we can understand exactly what is happening. We haven't yet got to that position. That is out of our hands. Myself and Claire Waxman have written to Claire has written to the Attorney General. I have also written about this. We are calling for that inspection so we have a better understanding of what needs to happen. It isn't that the CPS isn't at the table. They have been part of Justice Matters. We do have that action plan, and we are taking forward those recommendations.
Okay, I hear what you say there. What possible transformation options are being proposed to address issues relating to the welfare, recruitment, and of course the retention of sexual officers, the specific sexual offence investigation trained officers? When we went on our visit, we were told that there was all sorts of issues on them. If you can answer, Nick.
I'll address that if I may. So you're right. The SOIT officers, sexual offence investigation technique officers, are critical to supporting the victim through all the trauma of the initial reporting, the subsequent examination if there needs to be one, and questioning and so on and so forth, right the way through the wait for decisions around charge, and then the wait for trial dates, and then the trial. So that support is often extended over many months, sometimes years, depending on the complexity of the investigation. And it's a very, very intense role. I was one of the first male SOIT officers many years ago when there was an issue with male rape, so I've done it, and I know exactly how emotionally stressful it can be. And the situation we have now is that we are expecting our current batch of SOIT officers to carry more and more cases, because we are struggling to recruit and retain because of exactly that sort of stress and strain. So we're currently under strength, but the goal group is addressing this issue aggressively. And one of the suggestions that's being taken forward, which I think might actually have some degree of merit, is to try and alleviate the burden on the sort of the long-term SOIT officers by having SOIT officers, different SOIT officers allocated to the havens, so that for the initial reception and the initial sort of first few days, a couple of weeks maybe, of that victim encounter with the police service, they have a SOIT officer who deals with the initial trauma and takes all of that strain. And then once that sort of initial burst of activity is concluded, and we get into the longer term investigative work and the inevitable criminal justice process, at that point the SOIT officer who will be with that victim through the rest of the period is introduced, and there's a handover. The idea behind that is to take that initial stress and strain away and have people that are actually co-located at the havens that can receive the victim and do that initial support and care, and then hand over to somebody that can take the slightly longer term steady state support forward. That's being pursued as the strategy currently to try and address this issue, but there are all sorts of other things about recruitment, retention. How can we make the role more attractive? It is a voluntary role. You can't, post somebody to be a SOIT. It requires a desire to do it. It has to be the right sort of person, clearly. They need to be very strong emotionally and have great empathy, but also be a very competent police officer. So it's quite a skill mix we're looking for. So it's ongoing work. That initiative I described is one method that the goal group are actively pursuing, but the more sort of longer term recruitment and retention remains a struggle for us.
Right. Okay. Well, then that is a worry, and perhaps that, and I quote the Deputy Mayor, the woeful results that we're seeing. Perhaps I can ask you, when are you aiming to get people in place? How many officers are you short of in this particular role?
There are, on our strength, there should be 213 SOIT officers based on the BCUs. We're currently, in terms of deployable SOIT officers, so people that we can actually put out to work tomorrow, we've got currently 140 deployable SOIT officers.
Gosh.
So we are significantly under.
So, it should be 230.
213.
13,
yeah.
sorry.
Much more than half.
got
213 and you've got 144.
140 deployable. So there's more SOET officers trained than that, but some of them are, you know, for example, undeployable for various reasons. They may be ill, they may be on maternity leave, they may be on,
You know, I
for so on and so
understand
forth.
73.
So really this is an emergency for you to get these people in place.
Which is why we're addressing it through the goal group principally, and why this new approach in terms of splitting the SOET responsibility so that it's less onerous on one individual is quite an innovative approach.
So this could absolutely be the reason that the successful prosecutions are failing so miserably.
I think it's certainly the ingredients, absolutely. It always has been. A critical factor in successful prosecutions is that the victim feels supported all the way through, and that's why SOETs were kind of created 30 years ago, or 25 years ago, to do this job. But of course, as you said at the very beginning of this particular subject matter, the number of offences we're investigating has probably doubled, I should guess, in the last 10 years or so. And trying to keep up with that, with training and deploying SOETs officers, has been a struggle. Yeah. For the reasons I've explained.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is even worse than I had feared. I'm going over to my colleague.
I'd like to pick up the issue around digital forensics, which you have already touched on. Deputy Mayor, when you wrote back to us, you said the Met continues to invest in innovation and a cloud-based software which will significantly reduce waiting times when reviewing kiosk data and disclosure searches, and that was launching, I think, in the spring. Do you want to provide us with an update on the investment that's going in and what you are investing in, and when is it going to be fully rolled out?
So that's the magnet review, review of digital evidence that was being piloted. The decision has been taken to roll that out. It has encountered some technical problems in terms of rolling it out across the Met, so it is slightly delayed. We're hoping that it will be rolled out in the summer. Yeah, in the summer. So it is a couple of months delayed. The investment is there, and they're working to, regain the time. Do you want
to explain simply to us?
This is the
forensics at stations.
So this is the first stage of. There are 96 kiosks in in police buildings for the sort of first line of reviewing digital evidence when the password or the PIN number is known, so the officer can just download the evidence as soon as possible. What happens with that evidence, and there's obviously a hell of a lot of it, massive amount of information, is that previously an officer would have to trawl through it themselves, actually physically trawl through it. The magnet review is a solution which enables it to be all uploaded and to be electronically gone through. I've been to have a look at it. It can search for keywords, search for key dates, search for key, as you would imagine any search, and pull it together. That means that it is much, much quicker. It has been used in some cases already, and there's been some case studies where if a person had to look through that, an officer had to look through that manually, it would have taken months and months and months. It still did take a long time. It's not, done immediately, but the amount of time that it took was seriously reduced. What we has had a few technical problems in terms of rolling it out across the Met, and we hope for that to be solved and for the rollout to start in the summer.
Okay. But clearly, perhaps I'll come to you, Assistant Commissioner. There's been a huge backlog in digital forensics. I'm talking about when you send things off to your labs, your digital labs. And I think previously we've been told the Met was outsourcing additional work to third-party suppliers to try to reduce the huge backlog. And we heard this firsthand when we did a visit, I think it was one of the visits we did to Brixton. So can you update us on the progress in reducing this huge forensics backlog?
Yes, thank you. So I think just to touch on the kiosk approach first. So our kind of first point of call for any of this downloading activity is the kiosks, because they're based across the BC. As you've heard, there are 96, and in fact Charing Cross has just enhanced its kiosks to a whole sort of technical unit that's within the police station that does more than just download, but that's perhaps a side issue. So where we know the PIN number, where we can access the phone, which is typically where you have the complainant's or the victim's permission and you're dealing with a compliant individual, the kiosks are used, and there is no significant delay. So it's a matter of hours for the download to happen. Where we don't know the PIN or there is other technical issues with unlocking the phone, we then have to go to level 2, which is an in-sourced, in-house facility within our forensic laboratory. So that will go there and they will do what they can to access the contents of that phone, sort of defeating the PIN or the security. We've worked really, really hard to reduce the backlog. Sadly, I can only apologise I don't have the current waiting times, but it's a matter of weeks, sometimes a couple of months for, and I can get you the exact figures, the level 2 in-house. Where we've had the biggest issue, however, is where the phone is either encrypted in some particularly clever way or damaged so that standard sort of investigation is impossible. That's where we often have to send to third-party providers to do a much more sort of detailed, often deconstruction of the phone and extraction of chip and all of that kind of thing. That's where we've often had the longest delays because there's a high demand and there are not many providers. We have developed an in-house ability to do that. In fact, I visited it a couple of weeks ago. It's very, very impressive. But you know, we could do with enhancing that provision, and that's what we're working on as part of our digital strategy.
Okay, but there is this huge backlog, and there are issues where you need that. I understand the stuff you're doing at a lower level, but when you have something where data's been deleted, and that's where you need more sort of specialists to really retrieve that information. Are you investing more in third-party providers, boosting your contract to clear this backlog and to make sure then things are being dealt with in a more timely manner?
I haven't got figures for you, but having spoken to our Director of Forensic Services, he has been very focused on reducing that backlog, and that has involved, as part of that sort of part of that activity, investing further in outsourcing. But I can write to you with the current
I'd
figures.
really like to, and I'd really like to understand, you know, whether management board has actually discussed this and said we've got this problem, we're not getting cases to court. Part of it is because of this forensics backlog. You know, well, let's put some money into this contract to get it working 7 days a week rather than 5 days a week to clear the backlog. Are you aware of any of those discussions?
I know that it's been a real sort of plank of what Chris Porter, our Director of Forensic Services, has been doing. I can't give you the facts and figures off the top of my head, but I can provide them.
That would be really helpful. And I know also I saw that, and I'm wondering what action the Met is taking in response to a report from the Forensic Science Regulator that came out on the 25th of February, which picked up a number of these issues. It also picked up that over 1,000 DNA profiles on the national DNA database have been contaminated by police officers and staff and are having to be removed. Is that also something that's having an impact on this work? How are you responding to that?
DNA profiling is not directly related to, obviously, the examination of phones, and I'm not aware of the detail of that particular issue, so I'll have to come back to you on this, I'm afraid.
Come back to me on that. That would be really helpful. Thank you. And in terms of then the CPS, I think we've seen sort of national figures in terms of, and Assemblymember Hall's already mentioned this, you know, fewer and fewer cases being passed to the police in England and Wales. And we actually heard this from the CPS when we went to Kingston on that visit. They were saying, we're just not getting the files passed over to us, so it's for us to take forward. Do you know what the situation is in London in terms of numbers of files and how far it's fallen?
Yeah, the percentages I can't quote you from my memory, but I am aware that the referral rate from police to CPS has declined. What has also declined by a similar amount is of those cases that are referred to the CPS, the number that the CPS then charge. There's kind of a double step here. So we are currently referring fewer for decision, and of those that are referred, the CPS are deciding to charge fewer. So there's a kind of two-level of attrition here. One of the reasons that there's a decline in the submission or the referral rate to the CPS is because of all the work that's been done actually to address the disclosure issues. And of course I chair the National Disclosure Delivery Board with Max Hill. So I've been right at the forefront of this national work and understand it very, very well. And we have done an awful lot, I won't bore the committee with it, we've done an awful lot to try and get the balance right between progressing investigations but not presenting cases which fall apart because disclosure has not been properly addressed, because that doesn't help victims either. No. So a lot of the work that we've done has been to try and front load investigative and disclosure thought from where it used to be done, which is post-charge, to pre-charge decision. So what that typically means is that rather than getting a decision from the CPS to charge on the basis of the evidence alone and then worry about the disclosure as the case progresses towards the court date, which is what the traditional method has been, what we are seeking to do is bring as much thinking as we can prior to the charge decision about what the disclosure implications would be, so that we don't end up charging cases that would later fail, and so that lawyers are better informed when they make their decisions, because the impact of that means that officers have to do more work prior to referral. And I'm aware that there are a number of cases that are sitting, waiting to go to the CPS, but we have a long list of things that we need to do before they can go for charge.
And that includes the digital.
That part of that will be digital. A large part of that is also third-party material,
Yes.
doctor statements, social care, a whole load of sort of ingredients. And there's nothing wrong with that approach, because ultimately that will get to a steady state where the referral rate improves. But it's definitely a sticking point at the moment, and we are debating with the CPS. And this is where the Attorney General's guidelines are going to be very important, which are out for consultation now, as I'm sure you're aware. And they and our joint guidance to officers really stress the importance of adopting a reasonable lines of inquiry approach to disclosure. Because, you know, I think post-Allen, everybody swung a little bit too far to you've got to look at absolutely everything, which caused this kind of logjam in the system. Everything kind of went into stasis because everybody thought they had to look at every single thing that could possibly be looked at just in case. We've worked back from that to this approach where we are taking a reasonable lines of inquiry approach. There's a whole bunch of documents that we've created nationally to assist officers in understanding what their disclosure strategy is and informing the CPS of it, and having earlier case conferences. And the Attorney General's guidelines make that absolutely clear, that the expectation is not that officers look at absolutely everything in every case. You have to take it on a case-by-case basis. You have to take a reasonable lines of inquiry approach, and you have to have earlier consultation with CPS lawyers. Now, that in itself is problematic because the CPS numbers have declined over the last 10 years. They haven't got the number of lawyers they used to have. Hopefully that will start to change now with investment. But, you know, all of these things have conspired against us in terms of sort of expeditious investigation. I've kind of rambled on a bit, I'm sorry, but it's a multifaceted thing, and there are many moving parts. And I do believe progress is being made. I think we have started to free up the logjam. I think officers are now more confident in taking a reasonable line of inquiry approach, rather than being frightened of missing something. The magnet tool that the Deputy Mayor has talked about is a fantastic innovation which assists in that. The Attorney General's guidelines that are going to come out will further cement this reasonable lines of inquiry approach. We're running seminars up and down the country for investigators. I often speak at them personally. We have champions at sort of tactical, strategic and chief officer level driving this message. So it is an unprecedented effort across the criminal justice system nationally to try and address these things. Going back to Susan's point of how quickly will this all change, well, it's hard to say for exactly the reasons that the Deputy Mayor said, but I don't think we're going to suddenly get to a point where there's a step change. I think this is a kind of a war of attrition. We just need to nibble away and get better and better and better. So it's my expectation is that next month is going to be better than this month, and the month after that's going to be better than that. But where that leads us to, what the ultimate point is, I'm unable to say, and how long, what the steps are going to be, it's very difficult to judge. There are some green shoots. I mean, our detection rate, woeful as it is improving very slowly, but it's improving rather than declining. So I take comfort from that. And I am confident that all of the things I've talked about or touched on, in combination with slightly different timeframes, will come together and individually and collectively help us move this process on. Because it's, my people work their socks off, as I know you know, because you've spoken to them. I know you've spoken to SOAT officers. I know you know exactly how stressed and how hard-working they are, and your DCs that are running 15 cases. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're addressing. But I do think we're moving in the right direction, but clearly we always wanted to be quicker and we always wanted to be more impactful.
Is there one way that you could look to measure this? And I understand it's difficult, but at the moment you sort of have average length for certain investigations. Is there a way that you could look to, well, in 6 months, given we're putting all this in, we would hope to see that reduced by a month or something, and try to start looking at sort of length of cases? So I was looking at online child sexual abuse and exploitation investigations. you know, currently in the BCUs it's 185 days for a no further action, and on average 465 days for a positive outcome. I mean, that is just unacceptable. Is that not a way you could try to measure this, to try to drive the improvement that as a victim you want to see justice done in whatever way it is? And the length of time, 465 days, I mean, it's not acceptable. Is that something you would consider, Deputy Mayor, as a way to measure this?
Those waiting times are for online sexual abuse, aren't they? In terms, and we all know that in terms of the volume that's coming through, that we have real problems in terms of meeting that demand, because there is just far, you know, in terms of what is being uncovered. And the capacity to deal with that. There is extra investment, there are extra officers working on this. I
was thinking more widely in terms of this whole area. I'm trying to just bring to you know, all sexual offences. We're talking about all this investment. Is there a way, perhaps that might be a way you could measure to try to reduce the length of time before cases are concluded?
Yeah, so I think with any performance management, or, you know, in from my point of view, oversight of performance management, there is always a discussion to be had as to what are the best metrics you put in. How do you make sure that you are, you know, the performance and the progress is quick enough? And I am always interested in having a discussion about, well, what are the right metrics? I'm not interested in setting arbitrary targets saying, therefore, this is 20% reduction by this or whatever, when there are so many, as the Assistant Commissioner talks about, moving parts. If you take child protection, one of the things from the Oversight Board that I chair is absolutely that discussion is, okay, I need to know when should I know that the progress has been fast enough, has been swift enough, and where are we getting to? Now that has been a conversation for the last 2 years around what those metrics would look like, because it is so incredibly complicated. The discussion has been with the College of Policing, HMIC, as well as the Met, as to what is good enough and what is fast enough, and there has not been an easy answer to that, because there isn't an easy answer. We just have to constantly keep driving the progress and looking, as the Assistant Commissioner says, have we made progress? Do we feel, in the professional judgments of those who are operationally expert in this is about right and this is good? Those aren't necessarily about a numerical target. I know it can be frustrating from where you're sitting because there isn't a numerical target there, but we are having those discussions. I am having those discussions with those experts who can advise, HMIC, College of Policing and the Metropolitan Police, and we are constantly looking at, is this good enough and is this fast enough?
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there. I think maybe for the next committee it would be interesting potentially do some visit to this new digital facility, and also to look at the new IT, if that's possible. So perhaps I could put that on the bring forward agenda for the next committee.
Assemblymember Whittle.
So just to come in on the end of this, Deputy Mayor, I do understand Assemblymember Hall's frustration about this relentless rise and why there seems to be a clueless about it. I think I asked you about this.
Sorry, clueless about...
There is a rise in sexual offences and rape that never quite seems to be explained.
That's what Beneath the Numbers report did. It analysed the rise in the the difference of the gap between the Crime Survey for England and Wales and the recorded incidents that we have from the Metropolitan Police. It was a really in-depth piece of report which said that whilst you can look at some confidence of people coming forward, the evidence shows that it's about the crime data integrity and better recording. We do have an understanding of what is happening.
If you remember about 3 years ago, you were saying there's something going on which you don't quite understand. It's not just about reporting. That was 3 years ago. And then I met some people from your office to talk about this. So it's entirely down to reporting. Is that what it is?
No, recording is different to reporting. So when people were coming forward to the police previously, pre-sort of 2014, they were not always having their allegations and their complaints properly recorded. What Beneath the Numbers has shown is that a lot of the increase in recorded incidents is to do with much better crime data integrity, so that's much better recording.
Well, I think that in 3 years' time, it's likely, despite what you say, that we will be here asking exactly the same questions somehow.
Yeah. Can I try and assist? And this may not be helpful, but I put it forward in the hope it will be. I'm just thinking back, I was at DI running a main office where we dealt with rape and serious sexual 20 years ago, and the majority of rapes we investigated were what you might call stranger rapes or fleeting acquaintance rapes, where either somebody had been attacked completely randomly and raped, or they'd met someone that night for the first time and gone off with them and ended up getting raped. We rarely had what are now, a domestic rape or rape within marriage reported, or a rape within a long-term relationship reported. Make your own judgment about why that was, but we rarely got those. If you look at the sort of how the rape allegations we deal with now are made up, I think I'm right in saying, I need to check this figure, I think it's something like 7% are what I referred to as the things I used to deal with, stranger rapes or fleeting acquaintance rapes. The overwhelming majority are rapes that happen within relationships that are established, either marriage or civil partnerships or just partners. And I think that is where we have seen the huge step change. And why is that the people are now talking about that? Well, all the reasons that we kind of touched on here. But that, I think, from my personal experience, is behind some of this, along with better reporting, of course, and confidence. But these things were rarely talked about 20 years ago, and now they seem to be. And I think that's a healthy thing. I think it's good for victims, generally. But it presents the problems we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes or so.
So moving on to the next set of questions on the Met estate. Mr. McPigeon.
Thank you very much. We've discussed this at recent police meetings and also the budget meeting. I'm wondering whether, Deputy Mayor, you can provide us with any update on when you're going to make a decision on the Met estate.
So I'm afraid there's not much of an update to be given since last month. The Metropolitan Police are still reviewing their estate strategy in the light of increased growth of police officer numbers, as we've discussed before. I'm expecting proposals to come forward for next year around the estate shortly. Whether we will agree them all or not is to be seen, and depending on the proposals. But I want to be really clear that it's not going to be what will come forward as a proposal from the Met will not be that this is the estate strategy for the next 5 years, because we can't do that at the moment, because as you understand, the reasons we can't, the Met cannot do that and come forward with proposals is that what we know for going forward in terms of police officers' numbers is not enough in order to be able to really, really rigorously plan. We know we've got 1,369 extra officers from government money for next year. We don't know what will happen in years 2 and 3. Now that is incredibly important in terms of trying to plan an estate and plan where officers will go. So what I expect to come forward will be proposals as to these are the small number of buildings that the Met know, whatever the scenario for growth, will not be needed. And then we will have to keep reiterating what we do with our buildings, because we cannot pin it down at this stage, because we haven't got those numbers, we haven't got the certainty about funding, and we don't know what's going to happen apart from the next financial year.
So at the last meeting in February, Robin Wilkinson said that they were working through this, and we expect to be completed this month in reviewing our estate and our buildings, and very clear about that. So are you telling me now that has slipped? Because the Mayor previously to me had been very clear, and you had, that you expected to be signing off some decisions before PERDA kicks in a couple of weeks' time. Are you telling me that's now not going to be the case? I'm not sure whether that will be, honest with you, I'm not sure whether that will be the case, whether the proposals will come forward in time for the pre-election period. And as I said, it won't be they will not be proposals for the whole of the estate strategy like we went out with in consultation in 2017, because we had fairly good certainty about decreasing police officer numbers and knew what we were having to deal with. What I expect to come forward, and as I said, I do not know whether it will be pre-election or post-election, will be proposals from the Metropolitan Police for a small number of buildings that they absolutely know that they will not need, whatever the growth, whatever happens in terms of growth and whatever happens in terms of operational decisions that the Commissioner will have to take as to how that growth of police officers, how they'll be utilised and where they'll be placed. Yeah, I understand the logic of what you're saying, that they're going to come forward with a handful of building sites that clearly aren't going to be used, and then you're going to kind of pause everything else. But that is very different. So in January, the Deputy Commissioner was very clear when I questioned him, saying our expectation is we do not need to reverse it, we don't need to stop the strategy, we need to go ahead and reduce the number of buildings. So he was very clear the strategy was going ahead as was. Robin then said, well, we're reviewing it, but it's going to come to you very quickly. We're now in March, no sign of it. It sounds like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
So I don't think that is the case. This is, as I've said before at this committee, this is, genuinely incredibly complex situation with a number of police officers. We just do not know what will happen in the after the next financial year. I do know, as the Mayor has said, and as I think I said last time as well, that we will have a small number of buildings coming forward. We know that Paddington, Hendon and Wembley will come forward, and we will be taking decisions around that. And then we will have a small number of buildings that we are sure will be able to be put on the market for sale. It is difficult. It is, I understand that, over the course things have changed. We've got to get this right, because once you, as I don't need to tell you, once you've sold a building, it's gone. It's absolutely gone, and we've got to get it right. There are some really complicated property decisions to be taken, and complicated and complex operational decision the Commissioner was going to take about where she wants to deploy officers and how officers are going to be, where they will go physically in London as well as within different command units as well.
So if I've got this right, you're going to probably have a decision, it may or may not come through before PERDA, to sell off a handful of buildings, and everything else is kind of in limbo for many months until you have some confirmation from government about police funding. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's very clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the next set of questions is on antisocial behaviour, and I'll start off, and then I think Assemblymember Hall will come in. So look, knife crime, terrorism, terrorist attacks quite understandably dominate the news agenda, the political agenda, but antisocial behaviour is what Londoners have to put up with day in, day out. So I want to ask both of you, reports of ASP are increasing in London. What are the reasons behind this increase? Perhaps you might wish to start off, Deputy Mayor.
Increase behind in terms of antisocial behaviour in London last year. There can be a number of reasons as to why antisocial behaviour and reports of antisocial behaviour have increased. The increase was last year. Overall, the trend has been downwards. We have seen, and you're right, there's an increase from last year, but actually overall the trend is downwards. In terms of what's driving it, I would say there are a number of things that are driving it. There has been an improvement in the ability of Londoners to be able to report antisocial behaviour. The website now allows that for people to do so, to be able to report online. And I would also say, and I know some members of this committee will not like this, that if you have a situation where the number of police officers in London has gone below 30,000, and you have a situation where, as we had last year in 2019, where a number of local police officers have had to be abstracted because of real demands on policing, and we have a real focus on some of the large number of demonstrations, a large number of international events in London, with declining police officer numbers, some things unfortunately will not get tackled in the way that they should get tackled. And that, I think, has been driving some of the issues around antisocial behaviour as well.
Sorry, can I just clarify a point? Did you say, maybe I misheard you, but the trends are going down?
Pardon? The overall trend in reports of antisocial behaviour since 2010 overall has...
Can you just clarify that?
Yeah, has fallen. We have seen an increase last year. We don't know whether that's going to be a trend that will continue. Last year we did see an increase in reporting.
Your thoughts, Assistant Commissioner?
Well, I broadly echo the Deputy Mayor's sort of thoughts on this. There has been a 29% reduction in ASB over the longer period, and it's only, as you say, in this last year that we've seen an uptick in it, which is regrettable. And there are a number of reasons. I won't repeat what the Deputy Mayor has said, but we've been very stretched, as you'll know, clearly, with all of the extra activity that we've had to manage, protests being one of them, but not the only thing. I would stress, however, that we do consider, of course, antisocial behaviour as a really, really important part of confidence building. In fact, our ability to deal with it and recognise it, which is why we've got 1,700 officers who are dedicated to the 629 wards, and that's not changing. Those officers are our kind of first line of response to antisocial behaviour problem solving. That's the approach that we think is the right approach. We've also got, on top of those dedicated ward officers across London, we do have particular locations where we have additionality. So obviously the West End is one example. There are others where we have a dedicated team over and above our response and our neighbourhoods who deal with things like the nighttime economy. And the obvious one is the West End, as I've said, but we also have a similar team working in the sort of the Shoreditch area to deal with the nighttime economy issues there. Alongside people like schools officers, licensing officers, and all of these people, all of these officers sort of have a role to play in addressing antisocial behaviour. I mean, I'm sure you'll know this intuitively, if not from the facts and figures, but almost all, well, the vast majority of antisocial behaviour happens between 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the evening, often associated with schools exiting and pupils being on the streets and that kind of thing. And within that period, the busiest time, of course, is Friday, Saturday, where we have, in addition to all of that, you have the nighttime economy, people going out in the evening and being out and about much more. So we kind of understand the pattern, and we do take, as I said, antisocial behaviour extremely seriously, and we expect our neighbourhood teams to be the first line of response in dealing with them.
You actually mentioned your work in the Shoreditch area, and in fact I was going to actually ask you a question about what you do in Shoreditch, so perhaps I should ask you now in terms of to what extent is antisocial behaviour an issue for the nighttime economy in London, and very specifically, can you tell us more about what goes on in Shoreditch? I mean, in terms of partnership with the council, you also got the City of London Corporation. I mean, what's the police response and strategy generally for in terms of London's nightlife? I should add, I've been to a number of meetings in Tower Hamlets, as recently as about 3 weeks ago, the local Safer Neighbourhood Board, and people are not against the nighttime economy. It's just they feel that there's total lack of empathy, understanding of the antisocial behaviour and the consequences of that they have to live with. They certainly welcome the trade and the vibrancy, but unfortunately, it's the more negative aspects that they feel still, does not resonate with if I may say so, with the police, with the council, and indeed with this building.
Well, if you've been there, you'll know that there's been a partnership approach with Hackney and Tower Hamlets to create this neighbourhood improvement district team, which is part of the response to dealing with the antisocial behaviour associated with the nighttime economy there. We've also got an operation running, Operation Lagana, which is again predominantly focused in Shoreditch around the nighttime economy. And it's a combination of visible patrolling, visiting licensed premises, working in partnership, as you'd expect, with the council enforcement officers. It's early days for that team, but I want to reassure you that we are taking that issue in Shoreditch incredibly seriously alongside our partners in the local authority. And it's too early to say what long-term effect that operation will have, but it's certainly got some encouraging results in terms of stop and search arrests and venues that have been visited so far in its life.
Perhaps if you could give us some more details of what's going on in terms of the ongoing operation and outside the local assembly member, but I think the committee as well would welcome further details of what exactly the operation entails.
Well, it entails a mixture
of arrests and so on.
Yeah, it entails a mixture of visible patrol, as I said, and visiting licensed premises with enforcement officers, licensing officers. There's been a number of dispersals implemented by our officers when the situation merits it. We've had a number of stop and search operations targeting knife carrying and violence, as you'd expect. A number of fines have been issued, I think 20 thus far, in terms of breaches of various licensing regulations. And there's a plainclothes asset as well that is kind of sweeping in behind the very visible on the street activity to pick up the more covert antisocial behaviour that's perpetrated. So it's a mixture of activity across sort of mainly overt and visible, but some covert activity as well, involving local officers as well as some of our task force assets. So the TSG, for example, have been tasked into there as well.
Well, thank you for that. Before I bring Assemblymember Barry in, can I ask you, Deputy Mayor, do you think there's a need for sort of a more defined messaging that we don't just see the nighttime economy in terms of the pound sign? Because I've been to a meeting where the Night Tsar Amy Lemmy attended about 18 months ago, and that was the feeling of local residents, businesses in and around Brick Lane and Shoreditch. And then the meeting I attended 3 weeks ago, the local Safer Neighbourhood Board. It's just getting this thing over that we do care about them, we do care about their concerns. And they're certainly not NIMBYs, I mean,
So We work very closely with Amy LeMay, the Night Tsar, because and part of her, and a really important part of her work is actually, yes, it is about the economy and it is about having a vibrant nighttime economy, but absolutely core to the work that she's doing and the work that we do with her is that has to be a safe and secure nighttime economy that is balanced and that it cannot impact residents in the way that the nighttime economy can. I feel a bit like I've stepped back into my Hackney days talking about Shoreditch. So I spent a lot of time in my Hackney days trying to tackle antisocial behaviour from the nighttime economy in Shoreditch. So I know this, this area incredibly well. What the work we're doing with Amy LeMay is we have funded and invested in a Safer Sounds partnership, which is basically a partnership arrangement between businesses, nighttime venues, and the police as well, and how to ensure that the nighttime economy and its impact is safer, and especially around antisocial behaviour, incredibly important. We have the Women's Nighttime Safety Charter. Again, it's about increasing the safety of, obviously, particularly of women, and working with businesses. And Amy chairs, I think it's a monthly meeting with the Met in terms of licensing champions, and also Nighttime Borough has a Nighttime Borough Champions Network. So there's a real strategic approach to trying to not only ensure that London is vibrant at night, but London is safe at night, and the level of antisocial behaviour is reduced as much as possible. And then, of course, there are the individual operations and individual work with boroughs, incredibly important, because as we all know, this isn't just about policing, this is about licensing, which is a borough responsibility. It is also about some of the antisocial behaviour, which is not really a policing matter, but is about noise, it is about debris after nighttime economy, and it is about the cleansing after in those areas as well. So there is a real strategic approach across City Hall and across the Metropolitan Police working with the boroughs.
Coming back to you, Assistant Commissioner, in terms of the Shoreditch area, is there any joint working with the City of London Police?
I can't answer that directly. I haven't got a briefing on that, other than to say, funny enough, my first posting as a PC was Shoreditch. And I remember dealing with antisocial behaviour back then. And we were right next to the police station, the city police station there, and we used to work all the time with officers from that. Now, that's anecdote, and I know it's 30 years ago, but the point is, I think we have collaboration later on in the agenda. We do work closely with our colleagues in the city where we can get value from it, because it affects the city as much as it affects us.
I'm going to ask this, and I'll hand over to Assistant Member very shortly, but last Friday, and actually this is something I was quite pleased about, the Night Tsar does do what she calls monthly surgeries. And we went around meeting workers, people who work in the nighttime economy, the bank across the river, and then we ended up, they carried on, but I had finished off at Bishopsgate Police Station. We met City of London police officers who have to deal with the consequences of the nighttime economy. I was impressed. I know there's other criticisms in terms of how the Night Tsar addresses the ASP side of the nighttime economy, but I was certainly impressed with the visit and the officers who attended. I'll hand over to you, Assembly.
Yeah, so I have my hand up for this section just to ask a quick question about data, if that's okay. I know the Deputy Mayor was just talking about this exact question, really, which is the overlap between council responsibilities and police responsibilities when it comes to ASB. And we've looked at this before in the committee and talked to councils, and there's definitely, in terms of like knowing whether it's increasing or not, and knowing where it's increasing and where it's not, I know that councils are taking this issue quite seriously too. They're also improving their data collection. Is MOPAC doing anything to improve overall combined data collection on antisocial behaviour, particularly when it's noise and environmental related? I mean, actually, all of it overlaps. Neighbour disputes, all of these things overlap.
The dashboard that we have that everyone can look at is around police data on antisocial behaviour.
Yes, absolutely.
And that is, we are going to keep it on police data. You've asked me before in relation to will MOPAC collect the data from the councils, and I have said before that this is just, it is an area that we're not going to be stepping into. We're not stepping into because it is, as you know, it's not just about boroughs. It's also about antisocial behaviour data. It's also about the social landlords and I think it's, I always get my terms mixed up with social landlords, but social landlords, because it's some of it's about noise, about people clattering above, you know, really, really intrusive, and I'm not downplaying at all, but clattering, you know, from living in flats, people above them. So no, we are not going to be collecting data for those areas that we do not have responsibility on.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, the mayor has responsibility for London, obviously.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there is a, you said taking a strategic approach.
Yeah.
And I know, and I'm not asking you to do anything that's too onerous, but where councils are now collecting data, and I know they're doing things like issuing iPads now to their own officers, their noise officers, that kind of thing. That where there is data, it might be sensible to be looking at it. And also knowing, for example, like a council running a very good communication campaign about how to report things to the council could lead to a drop, an artificial drop in reports to the police, because they're now being reported to the council instead.
I mean, we, at the moment, our dashboard is on the Metropolitan Police Antisocial Behaviour. That's the way we're going to stick it. I would be interested, you know, in terms of looking forward in the next police and crime plan, if I am still, you know, post-election, but it would be, you know, worth looking at, well, it is a priority, London-wide priority on antisocial behaviour. What do we know about that?
Yeah.
You know, so...
Yeah. Okay, great. Can I move on to roads and transport?
No, so I think that's the whole scope of the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Deputy Mayor, you mentioned police numbers again as being a possible issue with antisocial behaviour. Can you tell me, over the last nearly 4 years, have you ever suggested to the Mayor that he stops putting money into PR, bicycle ballet, beach parties, and actually puts more of his money, because he's got a considerable budget of 18 billion, puts more of his money into the police to make Londoners safer?
So as you know, the Mayor has done everything he can to put extra money into the Metropolitan
No, he
Police.
hasn't.
Far more than the previous Mayor. Far more. He has raised the precept. He's taken difficult decisions to move business rates into the Metropolitan Police. Over £234 million extra has gone into the Metropolitan Police budget because of decisions the Mayor has taken. The problem with your premise around, you know, Sean Bailey's budget for, you know, for his mayoral candidacy talks
Point
about...
of it wasn't his budget because
Well,
it wasn't in his
second,
name.
one second. Hold on,
they're fantasy.
Sorry, Assembly Hall, can you just let her finish? Yeah.
What the Mayor has done is he has invested in the Metropolitan Police far more, and as I said, £234 million diverted into the Metropolitan Police. But what really importantly he has also done is he's invested into tackling the drivers of crime. So that, you know, you may...
It's going well, isn't it, don't you know?
You may flippantly cast aside things like boroughs of culture, but we know that what happens when young people do not have good things to do, good programmes to be on, do not have, you know, the opportunities that they need, they are much more likely to go into crime and into violence. What the Mayor has done is invest in that through the Mayor's Young Londoners Fund and other things as well. So he's not only putting money into the police, but he's also putting money into making sure that he tackles the drivers of crime. I think that's really balanced, and that's what Londoners think as well.
So I therefore take it that the answer then is no, that you haven't asked him to look at his own budget. I accept he's charging Londoners out there more money, and we're putting more money into the police, which everybody's happy to, because we want to feel safer. But I actually asked you, have you actually asked him to look at his own budget, his own amount of spend on PR, bicycle ballet, we're all bats, and all this sort of rubbish that goes on? Have you ever asked him to look at his own budget to put more money into police officers?
The Mayor has looked
yes
at
or
his,
no?
The Mayor has looked at his own budget. He's invested £15 million extra into violence against women and girls. He's put £234 million extra into the police. £70 million this, you know, into
maybe more police
diversionary
officers.
Activities for young. Yes, and more police officers.
Maybe for more police officers, when you've been whinging about the fact that the numbers are going down, perhaps at that point,
thanks to the Mayor's
perhaps
funding.
at that point we should have put more police officers on the street.
I
now, the
totally agree with you, and the government cut the police budget drastically.
And he's got an £18 billion budget. He could have found some more money in there.
Police budget.
No, you blame the government constantly, but it begs the question, is there any point in a mayor? Because actually he's got a massive budget. He could put his hand in his own pocket and given us more police officers, because we all know we need them.
There are 1,300 extra police officers being
right, let's talk
into the
about
Metropolitan
his
Police
promises.
because of mayoral funding.
Okay, has the Mayor delivered on his promises to tackle antisocial behaviour in London? And what do you think has been his successes? But more importantly, where do you think he has failed?
In terms of tackling antisocial behaviour, it is a London-wide priority that we expect, and the Metropolitan Police are tackling. As the Assistant Commissioner has talked about, the first line in tackling antisocial behaviour is neighbourhood policing. What the Mayor did when he came into part of his manifesto was to restore neighbourhood policing, which I know you don't like this, Susan, was drastically cut under the previous administration. Neighbourhood policing became, not a priority.
So he should have
He
put
has
his hand in
doubled
his
the
pocket.
numbers. He has doubled the numbers of dedicated ward officers across London. So every ward can have 2 dedicated ward officers and 1 PCSO. So yes, the Mayor has delivered on his commitment for neighbourhood policing, and that is incredibly important in tackling antisocial behaviour.
Well, I'm sure residents will feel very happy about that when they are having to cope with antisocial behaviour, which is an absolute blight on the lives of communities.
Sorry, I would like to ask a question.
No, sorry.
So
carry on.
what work do you think the Mayor is undertaking to...
Yeah, later.
What work is the Mayor undertaking to ensure that Londoners feel safe in their communities when they go out at night? Because many of them, unfortunately,
Susan, I don't know if we've just had a long discussion about what the Mayor and City Hall and the Metropolitan Police have been doing in terms of tackling antisocial behaviour, and not just the antisocial behaviour that's associated with the nighttime economy. If you want, I can go through it again about the strategic approach, what we're doing, the work of MOPAC and the work of Amy LeMay, the investment we have put into the Safer Sounds Partnership, the investment we've put into
I hear what you say.
ensuring that
I hear what
there
you
is
say.
the right approach
But
to
it's
antisocial
how
behaviour.
people feel. You could say you were making a cake, Deputy Mayor, and have all the ingredients on the table. Doesn't mean at the other end of it you're going to have a cake. It just means you've got lots of different things in different positions. But the end,
Susan,
just trying to bring it down to a level that we can all understand.
Absolutely, and the level that I think Londoners and the thing that Londoners absolutely understand is that the government that you are, the government and the party that you are a member of has consistently cut police officers since 2010, and that has had an impact on the
They
feelings
understand
of
we have
safety
the
of
highest
Londoners.
level of murder, knife crime, and all the rest of it.
Are you just
That's what they
ignoring?
understand, and they know it's the Mayor's responsibility, not the government's responsibility.
Yes, and if they don't, it's our job to make sure that they know that this Mayor has £18 billion and should have put his hand in his pocket. We all accept we need police officers and more police officers. Assistant Commissioner, be assured we all understand that. What we don't understand is when millions and millions of pounds go into PR when it should be going to make Londoners safe. I'll leave it there, Chairman.
Thank you. We don't take questions from the gallery, but perhaps you can see me afterwards. Yeah. Sorry. No, sorry. I've got to stop you. Yeah. We can talk after at the end of the meeting. I just want to make one final point on this because it is an important issue, Assistant Commissioner. I think about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a survey which was reported in one of the nationals about how police officers actually saw antisocial behaviour. And mine was that for a career-minded officer, it wasn't exactly the sort of area they would wish to sort of concentrate upon. Has there been a change in police culture? Well, I'm sure you'll say yes, but I mean, how do you actually get the message over that ASP is what Londoners experience day in, day out, is an important part of policing work?
I think I'll start by saying most police officers, I think I can speak for them, I am one after all, most police officers join the police service to help people and are happy to do that wherever and however they can. And if helping people is solving a neighbourhood issue that is working with partners, noise or litter, they'll very happily do that and see that as just as successful as solving a crime. I mean, all of these things are important. There's not a stigma attached to neighbourhood policing any more than there is to any other kind of part of policing. I've done all sorts of policing in my career. Many officers move through all of these disciplines. Of course, our priority right now, and every officer would, if you ask them, will tell you our priority in London is bearing down on violence. Of course, that is our priority, but you know, it doesn't mean we stop doing absolutely everything else, which is why we have our dedicated teams and why we're trying to focus on antisocial behaviour in the way that we've described in Shoreditch, for example, the West End, because these things don't exist in isolation. You know, everything links to everything else, and I think you have to take the approach that you bear down on the biggest priority, which is violence, but you're cognizant of the fact that activity around antisocial behaviour or low-level crime also will impact, maybe not directly, but indirectly. So, short answer is, I don't think there's an issue with it.
Thank you. So we move on to the next set of questions to be led by Sylvia Barry, Road and Transport Policing.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to follow up and do a proper session on some questions we've asked in recent meetings about the moving of the officers from the Roads and Transport Policing Command into the Violent Crime Task Force, which was in September 2018, if I recall correctly. And the discussion we last had with the Commissioner was that this was more or less permanent now, and that the RTPC was going to be restocked with officers that were being newly recruited. So I wanted to ask a couple of factual questions. First of all, what's its current strength now compared to its previous strength in the RTPC? Because we don't seem to have that data anywhere.
Right, I can give you reasonably accurate figures. I haven't got today's figure, but the RTPC strength, BWT is I think 1,500 and something officers. We know that we're running a 6% vacancy rate on top of that. And of course there's PCSOs, about 520 PCSOs on top of those officers. So it's a combined strength of just over 2,000. Overall, we're running something like a 6% vacancy rate. If you include the 111 officers that were abstracted into to work on violence, then that vacancy rate extends out to about 11%.
Sorry, can you repeat the number of people who are abstracted to the...
111, as I understand
111,
it.
sorry, I just misheard.
Those are officers.
Officers to the
Violent Crime
Task Force. And that leaves you with an effective 11% vacancy
Approximately,
rate.
I mean, yeah.
And that is what the Commissioner was talking about, refilling from new recruits, effectively. Okay, that's really useful. So in light of Vision Zero, which is our goal to have zero deaths on the road, and any changes in demand, which I don't know whether that's up or down at the moment, has this affected road safety and the ability to tackle road crime, this vacancy rate, this lack of officers?
I'll try and answer that if I can. So everybody accepts, I think, that Vision Zero is exactly what we should be aiming for. It's a fantastic aspiration. Everybody, I think, would accept that the 4,000 or so killed or seriously injured on our roads every year is unacceptably high. No one more than the Commissioner and the Mayor. The Roads Traffic Policing Command are our kind of dedicated resource that works towards achieving Vision Zero, as well as doing other enforcement activity, but they're not the only asset. So obviously every police officer is enabled and entitled to deal with road traffic incidents, and often do. But the spearhead would be the Road Traffic Policing Command, absolutely. So the abstraction of the 111 officers to focus on violence, I think, was the right decision, and that's why the Commissioner has extended that indefinitely, because we are making an impact on violent crime. It's hard yards, it's really difficult and attritional work, but it's important work, and we feel it's right that those officers who are often, road traffic police officers are often more experienced and more skilled than your average sort of member of a response team, because they've been in the job typically longer, they have driving skills and so on and so forth, so they're a very valuable asset. So I think it is right that they stay where they are to tackle violence, because that is absolutely a number one priority. What are we therefore doing to fill the gap? I think that's probably what your question boils down to. Some of what we've been doing is to fill that gap using overtime. So we've worked the existing officers a bit harder, we've asked them to work longer hours, we've asked them to work on their rest days. So we've bought some extra capacity with our existing officers, and that, of course, is not something you can do forever. Officers become tired and burnt out. So we're carefully monitoring our use of overtime, but it is one tactic that we're using to make sure that we don't lose focus on Vision Zero. Secondly, and you'd expect me to say this, we have to take a sort of a prioritised approach to how we're going to tackle our approach to Vision Zero. So 3 tiers, really. We look primarily, Tier 1 are prolific repeat road traffic offenders. Tier 2 are repeat prolific locations that always come up. And then Tier 3 is general visibility. So in terms of Tier 1, we really are focusing on some very, very significant offenders, using things like DVLA revocation of licensing, sort of an Achilles heel type approach to attack these individuals, to try and remove them from the roads. In terms of high profile locations, we've got some great results actually from 2 very, very notorious, difficult areas in terms of accidents, the A10 and the A12. The A10 was notorious for kind of street cruising and racing and antisocial behaviour. So we had a lot of speeding enforcement up there. And I think, I can't quote you the figures, but the number of serious incidents there in terms of killed or seriously injured has dramatically reduced. The A12, similarly, a speeding issue. A lot of enforcement activity has been done there. So where we focus our activity on these kind of locations, we can make an impact. Of course, if we had more officers, we could do more of that. But I think it's right that we focus on the highest profile areas first, because they'll have the most significant impact in the overall drive towards reducing killed and seriously injured. And overall, the visibility, of course, is important as well. So whenever our officers are out, they're marked, they're visible, they're engaging with road traffic users.
Okay, that's really useful. So in terms of the tiers that you just outlined, which is a really very useful way of describing what you're doing, obviously follow Superintendent Andy Cox, who is the lead for Vision Zero within the MAP. He's been talking this week about, for example, being out looking for uninsured vehicles. And we know from previous work that looking for uninsured drivers is a really good way to find people who you are wanting for other things. And it's a it's a very sort of effective way of screening, looking for people who are driving without insurance. He's been highlighting that 497 uninsured vehicles were seized in London last week. Is that up or down? Are you cutting back on that kind of prevention activity? Is that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? It's not clear from what you just said.
I would probably put that into tier 3.
So that is down on what? So that's been cut back on essentially as part of your prioritisation.
It depends. You can look at it if there's a particular location where we know we have significant numbers of these, then it would fit into the tier 2. But generally speaking, uninsured vehicles are across the capital. So that activity is something that officers would do in their general patrol. I mean, I can tell you a story actually. I was out with road traffic policing a month ago, and I seized an uninsured vehicle. And we weren't aiming to do it. We just happened to be driving along the road. We were using our onboard ANPR. The ANPR indicated the vehicle in front wasn't insured. We pulled over. We spoke to the driver. Driver assured us they had the documentation, went back to their address, which wasn't far away, didn't have the documentation, car seized. So, this kind of seizing of uninsured vehicles happens as part of normal duty. We also have an ANPR interceptor team, as I'm sure you know, which are also used in specific locations to target vehicles that are known to the system, maybe for no insurance, it may be for all sorts of other issues, and that often has a very high success rate in terms of identifying individuals, not only who are breaking the road traffic law, but often, as you said, will be involved in other type of criminality as well. So it has a sort of a benefit beyond just the road traffic element.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, obviously, I get a bit of debate sometimes in this committee about surveillance type issues, but this is truly intelligence-led surveillance in a way. This is a way of using things like ANPR in a way that is targeted genuinely at people who might be worth pulling over.
Well, I think I am a member of the public, of course. I would rather be pulled over because there was a reason for it than not, and of course that's what things like ANPR give us the ability to do.
Great. Okay, thank you. Just a couple more questions about other things that we're not really seeing enough of, I don't think, and one of them is data. There's an annual report that Transport for London publish on collisions and casualties, and that's currently overdue. That's a TfL responsibility. But the Met, there's the Road Policing Enforcement Statistics Bulletin, which also comes out. Now, these are statistics that come from the police. I've been asking the question I ask every year, which is about hit and run casualties, and I've had not a great service from the Met yet on this. Are you behind on sort of the admin part of the roads and transport policing? Because there is a problem with the data, because the data collection method was changed in 2017 for 2017. So 2017 data is the first of a new set of data. We haven't had 2018. Obviously, we haven't had 2019 yet, just finished. But there's currently no way of seeing if there is a trend in road casualties, because the last comparable year we had that we could compare to earlier years was 2016, and now that's 4 years ago.
I don't doubt you're right. So my understanding is we are able to know, for example, a breakdown in killed and seriously injured in terms of pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, drivers, whether we're able, within that, automatically to extract for example, a case where a driver has hit somebody and made off without stopping, I'm unable to say. I mean, clearly manually we could do that, so I'll need to go away and find out.
Well, I've had it in previous years, and now there's suddenly a problem, and that seems to be possibly not a data issue, but an admin issue. And we do know that we get the Stats 19 data still, so we can see how many people are being killed on the road. And it does, I mean, 2019's total was 130, and that was up on 2018, which was 112.
Yeah.
That's not subject to any kind of reporting. We know how many people have died. So far this year, in 2020, 13 people were killed in the first month, January. That compares with 10 the previous January. So, although these are not statistics, they are numbers that are far too high when they represent individual people. So I hope that we can, by discussing it in public and putting it out to you, urge you to bring people in as soon as possible. It concerns me that new recruits are being brought in, for example, given what you said about them being more highly skilled. They may not be as highly skilled if they're new recruits. The final question on this sort of resources is about Transport for London, who partly fund the RTPC. Are they satisfied with the service they're getting for the money that they pay? How much proportion of the funding comes from Transport for London?
Well, I guess that's a question for Transport for London to answer whether they're
have
satisfied
you received
or
any
not.
feedback from them?
I was in their offices recently and chatting to senior people there. They didn't raise any concerns with me. I'm sure they would if they had them, but I wasn't there for a huge amount of time, so I'm unable to answer that, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Can I just clarify one thing, because I don't want people to be under any misapprehension. So the 111 officers that are currently with the VCTF, in the first wave of new recruits coming in, we will not be putting new recruits into road traffic policing.
Oh, that is the implication of what the Commissioner was saying to us last time.
I haven't seen what the Commissioner said, but my understanding is that
May free up other, my understanding was that, you know, new recruits may free up other officers, other experienced officers, and so therefore you might. But I'd let the Commissioner talk.
We may have if we can get some clarity on that, because I may have misunderstood, but I understood that the transfers of officers to the Violent Crime Task Force was made permanent. What the wording was.
the transfer to the VCTF is open-ended, so there is no plans to bring those particular individual officers back. The recruitment that we're going through now brings brand new officers, absolutely brand new officers, into the Metropolitan Police Service, absolutely, but we would not be posting them directly into the Roads Traffic Policing Command. Okay. What I think the Deputy Mayor was referring to is the ability then, as those people fill the vacancies elsewhere, then it frees up experienced officers to move to and fro. But this is all, you know, work in progress at the moment as we understand what the recruitment looks like and where those officers are going to be posted, and we try and put them where they're going to have the most impact, of course.
So a quick question on speed enforcement, which is the second part of the section I was given, Chair. Sorry.
Yeah.
You probably, this is, I'll carry on if that's okay.
Yeah, just very quickly.
Great. We know that Transport for London's introduced new 20-mile-per-hour roads on red routes within the congestion charge zone. This is not, it's something like 9 kilometres of road, but obviously the Met is expected to enforce speed on these new roads. Will this increase demands on police? I'll combine all my questions. Have you made any representations to the Mayor about this? And have you been asked to comment on policies such as whether or not this could be rolled out to a wider area? And have you made any kind of argument about police resource and costs to prevent this? Because obviously congestion charge zone is quite small. Yeah.
I've made no representations to the Mayor about the 20-mile-an-hour zone. I've not been asked to. In terms of resource implication, it's very difficult to know. Clearly our job is to enforce the law, and the traffic part of that is the speed restrictions. And I think we have to fall back on our sort of principles that I outlined earlier. So if a 20-mile-an-hour zone becomes a problematic area, then it will benefit from a focused response, the same as any other sort of problematic area. If, however, it doesn't, then I guess it would receive the same sort of general visibility patrolling that any other area in London would get. So you will have to see, you know, and see what develops as these zones become effective.
Okay, I think that's
But Vision Zero, I mean, just to add to that, Vision Zero was not sort of dreamt up by TfL in isolation.
No. There's a long campaign for it, yes.
Well, sorry, of course, there's all the outside influences, but Road Traffic Policing Command was very much part of Vision Zero, setting the strategy, setting the vision. So all of this is not, oh, we're doing Vision Zero, what do you think, Metropolitan Police? Has been done in collaboration. So this is none of this.
This is a specific question about the extent of the 20 mile per hour.
Yeah, but
New
just
roads.
strategically, Road Traffic Policing Command have been very much working with TfL and part of TfL to develop and deliver Vision Zero. This isn't a separate issue for them.
Okay,
Thank you. So we've got 3 sets of questions, and I'm conscious a couple of members want to leave at lunchtime at 12. So if you can go through financial fraud, the next set of questions, Sylvian Wilder.
These are questions about fraud, and they're really quite simple questions. And I think the first one is to both of you. About a third of all crime is fraud. And I'd like to have a handle on the numbers which are dealt with in London. So do either of you know how many cases of fraud were reported to the MPS last year, or indeed in any year?
So the figures I've got from Action Fraud, which are for a period from April 2018 to March 2019, there were nearly 4,000 cybercrimes reported in London, 160,000 fraud crimes reported, and those are the figures for London from Action Fraud that we have.
I missed it. What was the total of those figures? The only one I actually caught was the 160,000.
So almost 3,800 cybercrimes reported in London, basically 160,000 total fraud crimes reported.
That's a total number of fraud crimes reported.
Yeah.
Do you think that figure is correct, Assistant Commissioner? Given that the total number of fraud crimes which allegedly occurred last year were in excess of 3.8 million.
Well, I think what we have here is an example of the phenomenon of a difference between the sort of crime survey in England and Wales and recorded figures. So clearly, if the figures are so different, people are choosing not to report formally to the police. I can only go on the figures that are reported to the police and then obviously onto Action Fraud, which are the figures that have been quoted. Do I think there may be a rump of offences which are not formally recorded? I'm sure that's correct. I'm sure.
Right. Now the position is this, and perhaps you can confirm this. If somebody defrauds a Londoner and a Londoner wants to report it, he's directed to Action Fraud. Is that right?
My understanding of the process is the report will be received by the Metropolitan Police and we refer it on to Action Fraud.
Yes.
What Action Fraud is a national arrangement hosted by the City of London. I know you know this, Mr. R, but hosted by the City of London. Because of the vast number of these type of allegations, because fraud is different in many ways to other crimes, in as much as it's committed remotely often, and it's not clear exactly where the offender may be. So for those reasons, it's important that we get a kind of a global view of what's going on so that patterns can be picked up, which is one of the reasons that Action Fraud collects all of this. Yeah. What Action Fraud then does is look at viable lines of inquiry that may exist in that allegation.
No, I'm not asking questions about the solution of fraud. I'm asking questions about the numbers which are reported in London. Now, I am told, and I have a note here, which says that victims of fraud are directed to Action Fraud. In other words, they don't necessarily go via the MPS. Now, since we have, in effect, the MPS has outsourced this to the city, isn't part, and I suppose this one is really for the Deputy Mayor, oughtn't we to know how much of that service which we are paying for, we should have some idea of the numbers of Londoners who are reporting these offences? Because it beggars belief that it's only 160,000.
So those are the figures that I have from Action Fraud from, as I said, April 18 to March 2019 was basically 160,000 fraud crimes reported in London. So your question, should we know the number of crimes that are reported? Yes, we should, and we do. I'm not sure, your secondary question, do I think that's all the crimes that are reported in London, all the crimes that happen in London for fraud? I'm sure there is, you know,
it's manifestly not.
No.
If there are nearly 4 million incidents of fraud reported in a given year, the chances are, and indeed we know, that Londoners are more likely be victims of fraud than anywhere else.
I'm not sure we do know that, do we? That you're more
well, I
likely
think
to be
we
a victim
do.
of fraud?
I have a note
The
here.
volumes for London
More,
will be bigger because
more fraud
London is
incidents
bigger.
are reported per person than anywhere else in the country.
The question
And
would be whether that's people, that visitors, tourists, people working in London. As you know, we have a huge influx of not. You know, I don't know the details of that.
No, I think that's a way of getting it out. Can I suggest to you that we ought to know, and certainly the MPS ought to know, even if MOPAC doesn't know, we're paying, in effect, paying somebody else to investigate, i.e. the city, to investigate crime on our behalf. We ought to know really how much value for money we're getting, and therefore we ought to know the numbers. Do you agree with that?
I can assist with some of the numbers, and
Please.
I understand the thrust of your question. So, action fraud is something that is a national response to this. You know that. In terms of the numbers of crimes that are reported to us through action fraud or directly to us that go to action fraud, the number is 160,000. So we've established that. What happens in action fraud? And I do need to explain a bit of the process just to give you a sense of the numbers and the value for money question that you asked. So of those 160,000 crimes, what happens is action fraud look at whether it's a viable line of inquiry, whether it's related or a same methodology for other crimes that might be reported into the city or to Essex or to Kent or anywhere else. And where they feel there's a realistic prospect of a productive investigation, they will refer back out to whichever force is the most appropriate to investigate. And unlike other crimes, the receiving force from the referral is the force that's got the most chance of following up the line of inquiry. In every other crime type, it's where the offence happened, but with fraud, because of the peculiarity of it, sometimes you don't know quite exactly where in the ether it happened. So you have to take the approach that the force that's got the line of inquiry is the one that takes the crime. So, the year 1819, just to give you some numbers around it,
yes,
we got 17,674 referrals for investigation from action fraud in the Met. Our detection rate out of those 17,674 is 15%, which is better than most other forces, actually. And we've created, on top of the sort of the standard borough response, to try and get a handle and try and give a better level of service, particularly to the high-end sort of fraud victims, we've created an economic crime hub across our BCU model. Target is 190 specially trained officers in that. We're currently running at 145 that are trained. And those are the officers that take the lead in anything that's more than a very, very straightforward inquiry to action all of those referrals.
Well, forgive me if I say this. You're saying very successful on the basis of the numbers of offences which are referred to by action fraud. Action fraud are referring to you, I would have said, a statistically insignificant number of cases, 70,000 of 3 million is statistically insignificant. So something is clearly happening at action fraud, which for some reason or another means that they are not referring matters to the MPS and conceivably to other forces where they think it's happening. It is alleged, I wonder if you care to comment on this, it is alleged that action fraud run a sort of triage service. And you ring them up and they listen to you and they say, yes sir, oh, terrible thing. And somebody at the other end of the line is effectively saying no further action will be taken. On the face of it, that appears to be true. If there are 3 million odd cases, you would need probably more people working in action fraud than the 30,000 people we have working for the MPS. to deal with that number of offences. So the thing I'm really asking you to comment on is this. Do you believe that action fraud, on the basis of the figures that you've given us, the tiny number of cases which are referred back to the MPS, are performing a service to Londoners?
I think that's a question that you'd have to ask Action Fraud. It's not my area of expertise.
Well, let me ask the Deputy Mayor.
Well, just on that point, I mean, I think, you know, clearly fraud is a huge issue and it's underreported. There's no debate about that. We deal with the actuality we have in front of us now, which is the referrals we get, and we try to do the best that we can with those. But I think actually, you know, fraud is such a difficult thing to detect. I think better effort should be associated with the prevention and education to stop it happening in the first place, which is a whole different thing.
Yes, I understand. Do you not think, Deputy Mayor, that Londoners deserve a better service from Action Fraud if on the face of it, this very tiny proportion of the number of frauds committed on Londoners are actually referred back by Action Fraud to the MPS, and maybe there ought to be some other way in which fraud is tackled in London rather than farming it out to Action Fraud, who I understand have farmed it out to somebody else.
So, as you probably know, there's been press reports about Action Fraud and about their performance, and some, negative press reports around that. So Craig Mackey has undertaken a review into serious organised crime. Action Fraud is part of that review. We're expecting that review quite soon, I expect there to be some recommendations as to the best way that fraud can be tackled across the country, and not just in London. So I'm basically waiting for Sir Craig Mackey's review when fraud is part of that, and we will have a much better understanding of what could be done better in terms of tackling fraud. I'm afraid it's kind of kicking it into the long grass. Well,
you're a Londoner. You pay council tax. I pay council tax. We all pay the police precept. The crime which a Londoner is most likely to be a victim of is a fraud crime, and the chances of anything happening as a result of that is very tiny. What I'm suggesting to you is that Action Fraud, operated by the City of London Police, who I understand have farmed it out to some American conglomerate, for all I know, who have offices probably in New Delhi or somewhere of that sort, are in effect not providing any service to those victims of crime, and therefore ought we not to be looking at the fact that we seemingly are not getting value for money?
So, I'm sorry, I don't really understand why you think that's kicking it into the long grass. So Craig Mackey has done
you said it was talking about, you referred to organised crime.
Well,
most fraud isn't organised crime.
Well, so Craig Mackey's review into serious and organised crime is looking at what is the best way to tackle fraud. I'm prepared, because Sir Craig has, we obviously got a very good relationship with Craig, as being Deputy Commissioner of the Met, as an expert in this area. I'm waiting for what he says, rather than individually going off and thinking, well, this is the best way to do it, this is the best way to do it. When we've got his recommendations, and I understand that's going to be really soon, it's not in my hands, it was a report that the Home Secretary has asked for, we will look at that. I'm sure it will have some good recommendations, because Sir Craig is such a professional and expert person.
So you're not willing to say that even on the face of it, that Action Fraud, to whom we have farmed out this service to Londoners, is performing a very poor service?
We know that there are problems with Action Fraud. We know there's been problems. There's been exposés in the papers. We know that their victim satisfaction is not what it should be. We do know there are problems with Action Fraud. What I'm saying is that as part of Sir Craig Mackey's review, this is being looked at, and he's the expert, and I'm going to wait for that. It's only going to be in the next couple of weeks. It's not kicking it into the long grass. I'm answering your question.
Will it come back before Purdah?
Pardon?
Will it come back before Purdah?
I have no idea. It's totally out of my hands.
You've just said a couple of weeks.
You could ask the Home Secretary when it's going to come back, because Sir Craig Mackey was asked to do the review and to do it quickly. It's totally. I have no control over that. So
Well, Well,
Side,
I'm certainly willing to say on behalf of the people that I represent, many of whom have been victims of fraud of one kind or another, we're getting an appalling service.
So I have already said, Tony, I did say that we know that there are problems with action fraud.
Yeah.
The solution to those problems are not ones I'm prepared to suddenly delve into when I know that there is an expert looking at this that's going to come back with recommendations. I think that's a perfectly reasonable position to be in.
The corollary
Can I just also say, in terms of what MOPAC has done as well, is we have funded the economic crime victim care unit. Yes. We are funding through the London Victims and Witness Service care and support for victims of fraud. I'm not downplaying this at all, especially as we know actually that those victims of fraud who are incredibly vulnerable, this isn't a minor matter. People are losing their savings and losing the savings that they have worked really hard for. It isn't a minor matter. There's real vulnerability in here, and they deserve and need to have a proper service.
I'm pleased to hear you say that. Now then, your function is to hold the, to use the cliche, the MPS's feet to the fire. Our function is to hold MOPAC's feet to the fire. I can tell you this, and I don't think I've missed a meeting, I don't know in how many years. It's the first time we have ever discussed action fraud.
We did an investigation into it.
Pardon? We visited
Roger,
them.
we did a big investigation,
yes, we visited them.
We?
But
Sorry,
in the sense of having a go.
I didn't know I was meant to bring subjects to here to discuss. This is your committee. You decide what you want to ask me about.
Of course it is. Of course it is. The point I'm just about to arrive at, my peroration is this. We've discussed it, and suddenly, as far as I can tell, completely out of the blue, we're told in a fortnight we're going to get this report all about the weaknesses.
It's not out of the blue. This is a public inquiry, a public review that Sir Craig Mackey was asked to do by the Home Secretary, and part of it is not the only thing.
Our fault we don't know.
No, I'm not saying that. It's not my review. It's not my report. It's a report that's going to go to the Home Secretary, but it's not out of the blue.
I'll leave it there, Chairman. I'm happy that just before I go, I was able to air this grievance which my constituents have.
Well, yeah, certainly issues about action fraud, but we've got some more questions around this topic, but we'll write to you, Assistant Commissioner.
I very much share Tony's criticisms actually on this, and I think part of the problem is that a lot of the financial institutions simply put it down as a business expense rather than putting money into trying to deal with it. And I also fully accept what Tony said about triaging. It's just not credible that this is the number of offences that should be investigated. I mean, one of the problems that I've come across several times, and I suspect this is outside any investigation into serious and organised crime, is where you get a bogus tradesman comes along and says, I'll do your double glazing or whatever, please give me a deposit, and he's never seen again. And then they make a complaint, and they're told, oh, it's a civil matter. We can't look into it, it's not a crime. And that happens time and time again, and it's usually vulnerable people who are caught out like that. Now, that's not serious and organised crime, that's just a crooked...
No, and that is also to do with, as you will know, due to trading standards at local authority level, which have been, I'm sorry, Susan, to say this again, absolutely cut. Those vulnerable, that type of doorstep fraud is often picked up by trading standards officers, and we have so few in London now.
Well, it's not just that, is it? Because people do report to the police, and their police say, oh, it's a civil matter, go somewhere else, and frankly, it doesn't get dealt with. If fraud counts for so much of crime, generally and in London, I have to say I just don't think it's given the right priority. And the net result is people think they're just going to get away with it, and they do. Like we've seen with other types of crime, like burglary, when you have this terrible, was it 2% of burglaries actually end up in a conviction? It's just not acceptable. And I hope Craig does come up with something, and no doubt the Home Secretary will shout at him if he doesn't come up with something promptly. But something has to be done. And personally, from my experience of what people have told me, action fraud simply isn't fit for purpose, and something radical needs to change.
Thank you.
I think that was the view of the West Midlands Police Commissioner as well. Described action fraud as, quote, not fit for purpose, unquote. Anyway, should we move on?
Yeah, anyway.
Okay, next set of questions led by Assembly Member Lismore on the Babcock International Training Contract.
Yes, a few questions about this. You may know that last meeting of the FREP committee we actually went into, the Babcock contract with the fire service in some detail, and I'll come to that in a minute. But could I ask, first of all, how long it took to negotiate the contract with Babcock?
The contract took a little bit longer because there was some real extra assurances undertaken and a review by an independent expert around the contract. It had good assurance processes. It took some time to negotiate it. I haven't got the actual. I can't tell you from start to finish. I know when it was signed, but I can't tell you. I can't tell you from start to finish. I'd have to go back and look into the full business case and when the decision was taken to put it out to tender. It's there on record. I just haven't got it in my head.
Well, if you write and let us know about that. How many people bid for the contract? How many companies bid for it?
Oh gosh, I don't have the ins and outs of the contract, who bid for it and how many people bid for it. Obviously, the contract was eventually let to Babcock.
Well, I mean, there are very few companies.
We did have a competition, and my recollection is that the numbers dwindled, but it wasn't that they were the sole provider.
Is this contract just for new recruits, or does it include other forms of training?
Beg your pardon,
is this contract just for new recruit training?
Or it's just for new recruit training.
Not for other forms of training?
No.
Okay. I presume you read the HMI report on the fire service Babcock contract on training?
Before the contract was let, we were aware, as were the Met, aware of the problems and the issues in the Babcock training for the fire service. This contract is very, very different. It has been through a lot of assurance. It is not the same type of contract that was let for the fire brigade, which I'm not an expert in any sense. My understanding was it let in 2011 for 25 years. This contract is for 5 years with the possibility of extending it for 2 years. It is a completely different type of contract. Babcock are not the same. They are not providing the same service to the Metropolitan Police as they are providing to the London Fire Brigade.
What flexibility is built into the Babcock contract?
What do you mean, what flexibility?
Well, flexibility in the sense of, we would like to change the modules in the training, or so the numbers involved are either more or less than it was before.
So there is flexibility, because one of the things, just taking a step back in terms of what the contract is, it's a contract to deliver, and I know you know this, the PEQF, the Professional Education Qualification for Policing. One of the reasons that the contract did take longer is the element of risk around this, because we are recruiting very quickly, as we have really good news, recruiting very quickly. Wanted to make sure that in letting this contract, we did not have any problems in terms of the training of those new recruits. So we had to really look, and the Metropolitan Police had to really look and look very carefully at how they can ensure that with growth, training kept, recruitment and training kept pace. So actually this is not the only channel for people to come in and be trained into the Metropolitan Police. We will have the PEQF, we will also have graduate training and non-graduate training. There are 3 entry routes, so it is very different to the London Fire Brigade contract in that sense. There is flexibility in there because we are, still testing to see how many recruits will want to go down the PEQF route, or how many will be graduates already, or how many will not want to go down that route. So there is flexibility within the contract.
But from time to time, the Met will review its training programme and decide it wants to do something different, do it a different way.
It's not,
does the contract include flexibility to do that? Actually changing the specification of the contract about what you're delivering?
Well, the important thing to sort of remember here is that this is not a Met design training package. This is a College of Policing national curriculum, which has been developed alongside academic institutions with whom Babcock have to partner. So we've got 4 universities in London that are responsible for the academic rigour of that element of the training. We have Met Police officers that are working alongside Babcock to deliver some of the practical aspects, so the officer safety and those type of things. So the national curriculum will only be changed if the College of Policing change it. And I'm aware that the Babcock's contract was gone over in immense detail to make sure it was able to flex if there were a change, but there's not anticipated to be, and it wouldn't be a Met decision in any event. It would have to be something that would be going through the College of Policing and involve all of those other partnerships that I've described.
Are there any other large police forces contracted to Babcock?
I don't have that information, I'm afraid.
Okay.
There are other similar organisations that are contracted by Babcock, yes. There are.
Well, perhaps we could know which major police forces are contracted to Babcock in due course. You talked about Metropolitan Police officers working with Babcock. Secondees, are they actually involved in the training itself, or are they just doing some oversight like you mentioned?
Depending on what type of training is being delivered, my understanding is that some of the practical training, so officer safety training, which is about self-defence and how to detain and safely escort and all of that kind of activity, will be delivered by police officers because they're experts in that. Some of the academic elements of the PEQF will be delivered through the universities, and Babcock do the remainder. So it's a kind of a mixed economy of delivery across educational establishments, Babcock's people and Met Police. And the PEQF, as the Deputy Mayor has said, is only one of 3 entry routes into the service, and it's the only one which Babcocks are involved in. The other is the standard entry route we currently have, and then there's a degree holders entry programme which is in addition to that. So there are 3 ways in. Babcocks are involved in the contract to deliver the PEQF route, as we've said.
Why do you think Babcocks can do it better than the Met in-house?
Well, there's an issue of volume, and a large provider can provide more efficiently very often than individual forces. There's a degree of expertise involved. There's a degree of drawing on a bigger team than the Met could muster. There's the partnering with the academic institutions, which is not something the Metropolitan Police is, it's not our core business. So I guess, and I wasn't involved in this is not my area of business, I guess one has to look at what is the most appropriate way of delivering the package that we're required to deliver from the national curriculum. And the decision was taken that we need a partner to work with. A procurement process was run with those specifications, and Babcock's ended up being the people who best fitted that requirement that we set out.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk about flexible numbers. I mean, I hear what you say about the Fire Brigade contract, but the Fire Brigade this year is having to contract an extra 300 places at the Fire Service Training College in Morton Marsh because Babcock couldn't flex to take the extra numbers and training that they've been asked to do. And that's an extra 1.3 million that's got to come from somewhere.
I can deal with that because clearly, as the Deputy Mayor said just now, there's uncertainty about the volume of the flow of recruits in. We're still not clear how quickly and how many and when. So one of the flexibilities that I do know about that's been built into the Babcock contract is it's not dependent on the number of recruits. The cost is not based on the number. We've got flexibility so that we can increase or decrease, and the cost will not vary.
But also,
it's not a question of the cost, it's a question of the capacity.
Yeah.
And the real problem for Babcocks is they simply didn't have the capacity to flex the contract.
And that's why this contract is very different, because those 4 higher education institutes are where the flex is needed. You will need flex within Babcock, but actually, and this has been tested, and one of the things that I was really, really concerned about in letting this contract is, is there enough flex in this for growth? That was tested, and that's been tested with, it's not just Babcock's that flexibility needs to be had for, it is also needed with the higher education institutes that we are partnered with, for the 4 HEIs that we're partnered with. It is, it is really important to bear in mind that the PQF route, it's not that we're shutting, the other routes into policing will now be shut down. We have 3 routes into policing. There will be flexibility within each of those 3 routes, and the contract that we've got with Babcock allows that flexibility, and it's been tested with Babcock, and it was tested with the higher education institutes.
What KPIs have you put in the contract?
I don't have that here. There are a number of KPIs, and that has been gone through very, very carefully, and we've had, in terms of assurance of the whole process of this, we had some independent assessment of that as well, because it is such a crucial element of recruiting officers and not having that having problems within it.
In terms of the KPIs,
we can let you know. You might.
Yeah, I don't have them to hand, but I do know that part of the negotiation, the contract, was the ability every 6 months to swap out 2 of the KPIs for different KPIs if we felt that the KPIs that we were currently using were, for whatever reason, not giving us the information we needed to judge the value and efficacy of the contract. So I can't, I'm afraid, off the top of my head, give you chapter and verse of all the KPIs that have currently been agreed, but I do know, to repeat myself, that we have part of the contract agreement is that we can swap 2 KPIs every, I think it's 6 months. So that we can monitor and adapt our performance regime as it becomes necessary.
Perhaps when you write to us about those other things, you can let us know what the KPIs are. And just to finish, I mean, the criticism that HMI had of the brigade contract was that it was both inflexible and expensive for what they were getting. Did you have any discussions with the LFB before you looked at the Babcock contract?
Yes, there were.
And with HMI?
I'd have to go back and check about HMI. There was definitely discussions from the Met to the LFB.
What did the LFP say?
What did the LFB say? Yeah.
Well, I do keep stressing this is a completely different type of contract. This isn't Babcock delivering the training. The higher education institutes are delivering the training that is set nationally by the College of Policing. Babcock are part of the package of, you know, they are an important part of it, but it is very, very different type of contract.
If the training's been delivered by the universities, what are Babcock actually doing then?
They're part of the Met felt, and the business case stacked this up, that they needed somebody to help them to develop and manage this, as it's a complex, it is a very, you know, volume and the complexity of London, very different to outside forces who might have been able to just contract with one and have just contracted with one higher education institute. London is so huge, we don't just have one higher education institute that we can contract with. So
the relationship between the MOPAC and the higher education institutes, is that a direct relationship, or is effectively Babcock subcontracting to them?
I don't know is the short answer. My understanding is that we have a package that delivers the training we're required to deliver. The academic institutions we're partnered with, alongside Babcock, provide the academic rigour and the quality assurance of the training. Most of the classroom training is delivered through Babcock's trainers, which is their element of it, the quality of which is administered and checked and assured by the academic institutions, the four that I've talked about, and the very practical elements of the police training that have to be done, such as officer safety and all of those bits, are delivered by police officers. So it's as I said at the beginning, it's a mixture of those three, and it was felt that was the most cost-effective, most efficient way of delivering this curriculum, which is set nationally. There's a long lead-in time to all of this, as I'm sure you know, and I was at 2 or 3 testing sessions at Management Board where we had all of these sort of what-ifs and the questions, and we spent a long time.
I did ask what the lead-in time was, nobody could tell me.
Well, I wasn't there at the beginning.
The what, sorry?
I did ask, my first question was what the leading time was, and Sophie said she didn't have that information available.
Well, I don't know when it started, but all I'm trying to describe is it was a process that has taken many months, which I was involved in some of as part of Management Board, and much else happened with our experts that were developing.
But going back to my original question, you can't tell me whether the arrangements between the universities and the police are a direct contractual relationship, or whether effectively they're subcontractors of Babcock.
I can find out. I can't tell you here and now, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, I'm surprised. Okay, thank you.
Okay, last set of questions on non-crime hate incidents to be led by Assemblymember Whittle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Assistant Commissioner, what is your opinion on the requirement made by the National Hate Crime Operational Guidance to record hate incidents, irrespective of whether there is any evidence to identify the hate element?
Well, this has clearly been in the news recently. This approach, I guess, stems back, certainly in the Metropolitan Police Service, as far as the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. This is where much of this had its sort of initiation, and there have been celebrated cases since then where a lack of recording of non-crime but hate-related issues have contributed to a failure in service. The Pilkington case is the most obvious one that comes to mind. So the approach that we take in the police service is that if we are called to deal with an incident and a person alleges offensive language has been used, whether in whatever type, based on their personal characteristics, but it doesn't amount to a crime, so it's not an assault or a crime of violence or a formal harassment or a public order offence, but nevertheless that type of language was used. Our commitment is that we will record that, but not as a crime, but we'll record that as an incident. And the idea behind that is, A, to provide some reassurance to people who want reassurance that we take what they say seriously, and B, so that should there be a recurrence of that, and it's an obvious point, but should there be a recurrence of that, and we send officers again to the same venue 3 weeks later or a month later, they are aware, or should be aware, that this has happened before. And so that might temper their response. It might give them extra food for thought about how they're going to deal with it, and ideally allow them to make a better risk assessment about the situation they're going into. So for all of those reasons, the guidance was produced, and I think it's still fit for purpose.
So, Commissioner, you support the College of Policing guidelines on this then, that basically these incidents, even though they're not crimes, should be recorded as hate incidents. You support that?
We follow the College of Policing guidelines.
Right, so that those hate incidents basically then can be seen by advanced checks, even though they're not crimes. They can be seen by advanced checks for people maybe going for certain types of jobs. They will come up. Even though there's no crime involved, that's fine by you.
They'll occur if a particular type of security check is taken, yes. They'll be available to be disclosed.
Do you know very much about the case of Harry Miller that I think you referred to at the beginning there in the High Court? You know about the case?
I know about the case. I'm not an expert in it.
Right, okay. Well, you know that because of various tweets he liked, as it were, he was called by a policeman who said that he had come to check his thinking. Check his thinking. What is your view on that?
That's a matter, I mean, the circumstances of that particular case are a matter for Humberside Police, of course. I can't comment on whether the officer did the right thing or not. I wasn't part of that decision-making process. My point is,
all right, but I mean, you're a very senior policeman.
Yes,
right?
I'm giving you my
This
opinion.
just happens to be a case where Harry Miller right, had the perseverance, whatever, to go to the High Court. Yeah. We have no idea how this is, how many times this might be happening. He was told that he was had to check his thinking, right? And basically, he came back and said, this is sort of Orwellian. And basically, when it actually came down to the case, which was about him, I think he liked some sort of limerick about a trans woman, something like this. Essentially, the policeman then went into all sorts of strange details about why he'd come, and then said, I've been on a course about it. So your policemen are going on courses about this sort of thing, right? The end result is that this man was taken to a very, very, a level of depression because of what was happening, because someone felt that they could check his thinking. Now, do you not find that that is an extremely frightening prospect that we're facing now?
It's a matter for Humberside. I can't comment on the Humberside Police case. All I can talk about is what the Metropolitan Police's approach to this is, because that's relevant to Londoners. And, the Metropolitan Police approach is in line with the College of Policing guidance, which is that we recognise that it's important to understand incidents which may amount to some form of...
Yes, I know you've already been through that. You've already told me. But the judge, Mr. Justice Knowles, in this particular case, right, compared the actions of the police to the Gestapo or to the Stasi, right? He said very, very worrying, very, very worrying. And there is this sort of assumption made somehow that if someone says something which, that is a hate instance, this will automatically possibly lead to a hate crime. And he said that this was, in this particular case, that there was absolutely no evidence to suggest that at all, right? But it's still been reported. He's still on the statistics.
All I can say, I do understand the point you make, of course I do, and disproportionality is unwelcome wherever it occurs, and maybe this was disproportionate. I'm not giving a view on that. What I'm trying to say, I'm trying to reassure people
disproportionate?
No, I'm saying you are suggesting it's a disproportionate. I'm saying that...
No, I'm suggesting it's more than that, actually, sir.
Right, I'm trying to sort of get to what you want to hear from me, which is it important for the Metropolitan Police to recognise these kind of issues as potentially important? Yes, it is. Should we know that when we go to a neighbour dispute, for example, or any other kind of dispute, should we know that previously, when officers have been there, one or other of the parties has used offensive language for whatever reason, based on the personal characteristics of the other person? Is that an important thing for the officer to know in understanding how best to deal with the incident in front of them? I would say yes. I think the principle is correct. And if you speak to many officers, you'll know that they go back time and time again to these kind of things, and they escalate. And this is the whole purpose of making the record, so that we understand.
This was a case that was not going to escalate. The judge made that perfectly clear. You're making this assumption, and as a result, going down a very, very dangerous road. Very dangerous road indeed, I would say. And if I could just sort of ask you as well in that case, to go back to the guidelines, whether we're talking about hate crime or hate incidents, what is your view on the definition, for example, that the word the victim, in the victim's perception, that this is possibly a hate crime, right? First of all, so the word victim is used immediately. Why do you not use the word complainant? Wouldn't that be legally far safer?
These are all issues which have been debated and thought about clearly, and there's different approaches one can take. But what I come back to is our job is provide a service which people can be confident in. And I think if we start to use technical language with members of the public, they may not fully understand what complainant exactly means, whereas victim is a commonly understood term, which
it's assuming already that there's a problem.
Well,
if you put victim in the definition, it's assuming already.
This is a national position that's been adopted, and it's not for the Metropolitan Police Service, unless there's reason to divert from it. So the terminology victim flows through everything that we do these days. There's the Victims Code, the Victims Charter, the Home Secretary talks about victims' rights. That boat has sailed, I'm afraid, and we use the term victim to describe a range of people. In technical terms, if you're approaching a court case, you're a complainant. Or if you're making... But actually, we choose to use the word victim because that is the common parlance, that is what people understand. Some people don't like that, I understand that, but we have to use the word that is most acceptable to most people, and victim happens to be that word.
It doesn't worry you, for example, if you go on with that definition, that basically it requires no evidence whatsoever, that this is a unique thing in that it actually requires no evidence. In fact, it requires not only no evidence, but it's the perception of the victim along or anybody else. What does that actually mean as a policeman? How would you define that, or anybody else?
Well, the purpose of the wording as it is to make sure that there's a degree of subjectivity, because it's the important thing to understand about harassment and victimisation is there's the physical act, but then there's the perception and the effect it has on the individual. These are very difficult things to get right in exact language, but we try. And this definition is designed to recognise the subjectivity, that if you feel that the motivation behind the commentary is based on your personal characteristics and offensive, then that's how you feel. That's your reality.
But therefore it then should immediately become a crime statistic or a hate incident statistic, even though you feel that?
Well, that's how it...
I could feel something you're saying to me now is somehow hateful. What, can I go and report it? Yes, I can.
Well, I'd like to think I'm not being offensive.
I'm just using that as an example, and you know full well what I mean, sir, here.
No,
listen, the fact is that it seems to me that you are now policing people's thoughts. If a police officer turns up and says, I've come to check, I need to check your thinking, right? The mere fact that even if he was going above and beyond these guidelines, that he felt he could do that. And what worries me is how many people, right, who don't have the various perseverance maybe of Harry Miller, actually would just simply go along with it because they're none the wiser.
I'm not quite sure I'm not sure what you want me to say. I mean, I'm trying to set out the general position. The specifics of the Humberside case is difficult for me to comment on for obvious reasons. It's not my force. I don't understand the very, very fine detail of what you do. I'm not saying you're wrong. It's not something that's familiar to me. What I can do is describe the approach the Met Police takes and explain the reasons why we take that approach. And that's pretty much the approach most police forces take. College of Policing Guidance is evidence of that. And I think it's the right approach for the reasons I've articulated. Will there be occasions where somebody gets it wrong? Undoubtedly, there are all the time, not just with this type of thing, but with all sorts of things. We're all human. But it doesn't mean that the principle is wrong, I think.
I think the principle is wrong. I think that it is... I'm alarmed to hear you say that you have no problem with the guidelines. I am very alarmed because this is making you into the thought police, you know. It's making you the thought police, not just the police. And when you think as well what we've been discussing here today about sexual offences, about violent crime going up, the mere fact that whether it's the Met Police or wherever it is over the country are doing this kind of thing, you know, will make most people extremely frustrated at the very, very least.
what I want to do, if I may just make one comment, my only motivation is to try and provide the best service and protect people the best way we can. We feel in the police service that this approach does that. Are there disadvantages with it? Will people get it wrong occasionally? Of course. But fundamentally, I think it's really important that we recognise these issues and try and do something about them, because they do lead, time and time again, to crime. And anything we can do to prevent crime, reduce risk, we should do. And that's the driving force behind this.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, no one is suggesting that we don't understand these incidents, because we all do. It's just that this particular approach, you know, this feels like the tip of the iceberg of it. And I think that, you know, this is extremely worrying.
Peter, Assemblymember Hall and then Assemblymember Disbell.
Yeah, I'll be brief because Peter said at the end what I was thinking. You said, Nick, that you want to have a service that people can be confident in. And I do assure you that the vast majority of us are very proud and grateful to police officers, seriously. But there is an increasing concern about the thought police. And I think that's even exaggerated more by the fact that if shops have burglaries for under £200, it's not looked at as much. If the burglaries are going absolutely sky high, and there isn't the policing to deal with it. So it's a case of prioritisation of what you do. And of course, the media picks up on the thought police far more than other things. But to my mind, it does damage the force somewhat when we hear about these sort of stories about the thought police and what people may be thinking or doing, when there are other elements, and Peter mentioned this as well, the very first section we had where prosecutions are nearly non-existent on sexual offences, and the Deputy Mayor herself said it was woeful. When we're in a situation like that, and yet police time is spent on what we would call thought police, that doesn't actually help the Met, which is what we're concerned in. And do you see and understand that?
I mean, I spend my whole time trying to prioritise the resources we have to deal with the things that are most important. But it doesn't mean you throw away everything and just focus on one thing. The trick is to try and focus on the most important thing most, but still provide a service to the broad range of Londoners that have other issues that have to be dealt with. And I think, you know, effectively what we're talking about is antisocial behaviour with a potential sort of personal characteristic hate element thrown in, and that's important. We talked an hour ago about how important antisocial behaviour is. This is an element of it. So we can't just ignore it and say everything's about burglary, everything's about robbery, or everything's about violence. But we do have to make decisions, and I think we tried really, really hard to get that prioritisation right. I mean, we talked about another example just now with the Road Traffic Command. I'd love to have a full complement of my traffic command. Of course I would. But I recognise that actually I'd rather have them work slightly harder and be a bit more overtime spent and actually focus on violence, because actually of the two, I want to focus on violence most, because so you understand, so I know you understand this, and what I'm trying to explain is that prioritisation is something we do all of the time.
I totally understand that. Our concern, very, very many of us, is this going into a whole new area of the thought police and looking at, well, does that person really mean this or that? We spend a lot of time on things around Twitter that is, well, maybe they've pressed a like or done this or that. Well, somebody's being murdered down the road, or somebody's not getting prosecuted properly for a rape or something like that. You have to look at those elements and think, actually, what is more important?
But what we do know, and I don't want to keep quoting this particular case, because like the Humberside case, it's one case in the many, many thousands, but the Pilkington case is an example where lack of understanding of the history of the constant but sub-criminal behaviour led to the death of a mother and child. And so I'm not suggesting, every case is going to be like that, of course not, but it's impossible to predict the future. So in responding to a call for assistance from the public, it might be about a dispute, it might be an argument with a neighbour, it might be a noise complaint. If, as part of our response to that, it comes to light that one of the people involved has used this type of language, then it's entirely right that we make a record of that, so that when we go back again and again, we're not going to it for the first time again and again and again, and then when we go the fifth time, there's a tragedy. So
Okay,
That's the purpose
we're
behind
talking
it.
of different elements. I'll leave it there, but you can see the concern for very many of us.
Assemblyman Disball, and then it's time for lunch.
Yeah, okay. I mean, talking about history, I remember when I was studying the 16th century history, Queen Elizabeth I said in relation to the Reformation, I don't want to open windows onto men's souls. So the issue of thought police goes back an awful long way. And what she meant by that was, if you keep your views on Catholicism to yourself, that's all right by me, but if you start trying to promote it, we'll be after you. And I think what we have here is a modern version of that. But what strikes me as a bit uncomfortable is that this ends up coming up on a DBS check when somebody's actually not committed an offence.
Yeah.
That's what gets me. I don't have any problem with somebody being warned, this is not a very clever thing to do. That's could be beneficial to the individual concerned. And that's not thought police, because somebody's actually done something or said something rather than what they actually believe. And there's a lot of subjectivity in this. If we look at the rules, it says any action deemed to be motivated. Well, who's doing the deeming? Even if there's no evidence. Those two phrases, and any action, those three phrases or three subclauses, to my mind, do create some problems. And if it wasn't going to end up on the DBS, I wouldn't be so concerned about it. But I think there is an issue here, somehow, that we've got to try and square the right to free speech, as the judge said. I wouldn't go as far as saying it was like the Gestapo. I mean, that's ridiculous. But I think perhaps some of the phrasing in the College of Policing needs to be looked at, and also what actually happens. I fully accept what the Assistant Commissioner is saying, is that officers need to know if there's a history, but does the whole world need to know?
I mean, I do understand the concern, and again, opinion is split, but you think about the purpose of a DBS check. I mean, these are checks that are done on people who want to work with particular groups of people who are deemed maybe vulnerable, so children or vulnerable adults or other groups like that, where it's really important that a proper risk assessment is made. And a DBS check will show what's shown on police intelligence databases as opposed to crime. So it's not conviction data, it's not something anyone's guilty of, it's something that has happened and has been recorded. We're required to provide that information to the requester. It's up to the requester to make a judgment based on the information whether or not they think that is relevant to the application that's being processed. So, if you're a headmaster of a school, infant school, and someone applies to be a teaching assistant, for example, and the DBS reveals that on 4 occasions they've used racist language towards a neighbour, you might consider that that's not the sort of person you want as a teaching assistant. I don't know, but that's a decision for the person making the request, not a decision for the police service.
Well, I accept that, but if it's not been proven they actually said it, it's an inference. If it had been proven, you may well have prosecuted. That's the point. It's where there's been no crime that ends up on DBS. And as I say, I've got no problem the police knowing about this, because obviously you do need to have an idea what's going on. I mean, are there any other crimes where no crime gets reported on the DBS? Is that not just hate crime, but more generally?
Well, police record criminal intelligence all the time. So what we're told
on the DBS system.
Yeah. No, the DBS isn't a system. The DBS is just a check that is
exactly.
It's the name of a check which goes across a number of databases.
Right. Well, that's the point I'm putting to. Are there any other no crimes that end up on DBS?
Well, quite possibly. I mean, who knows? I mean, the point is that we record criminal intelligence thousands of times a day, and information that we receive from members of the public. It may not be specific to individuals, or it may be specific individuals.
I'm not talking about a particular case. We've dealt with the homicide case, and I'm not going to raise the facts of that. What I am asking about is if somebody hasn't committed a crime, but there's been some sort of allegation that's found not to be proven, or there's no evidence to support it, or there's just an allegation, or somebody deems X, Y, or Z, can that end up on the DBS as well?
If it's on the criminal intelligence system, potentially yes. But that's the whole purpose of an enhanced DBS check.
Well, I think that's a line of questioning we may want to follow up on another occasion.
Well, let me give you a real life example, if I may, because it may assist in understanding why it's important for these DBS checks to be conducted. So Ian Huntley, who murdered the 2 schoolgirls in Surrey, had no convictions, but he was known for allegations against him for that type of thing. Now, that wasn't known because it wasn't shared, because it wasn't a conviction. And that led to a review of the approach we take in sharing information which is non-conviction data. arguably, had the school known that he'd had previous allegations against him for sexual offending, which for whatever reason never got to court, would they have employed him in that school? Who knows? We don't know. But the point is that that's the kind of risk we're trying to mitigate with these DBS checks. And the police's responsibility is to provide the information. The action that is taken on that information receipt is that of the person that's asked for the check.
Yeah, but, sorry,
Yeah.
I don't want to but is there any sort of appeal again by the individual concerned against this, other than judicial review, which is what happened in this particular
No, there
case?
is.
There's obviously not a practical solution for 99% of cases.
There
It's
is
just you have to
an
dispute.
appeals process. As Chief Constable in Surrey, I used to administer them, so individuals can request that the particular piece of information, whatever it is removed or not disclosed. And it's a judgment for the Chief Officer to make if that request is made and whether or not they're willing to do that. And again, it's a judgment call based on the circumstances of each individual request. Sometimes it's granted and sometimes it isn't.
And that's the decision of the Chief Constable.
Or the delegated authority. Sometimes it will be the Chief, sometimes it will be someone that's delegated by that Chief Officer.
But at that sort of level.
It's at that sort of level, yeah. I mean, I did them personally when I was a Chief. Because it's so important. I mean, I do not dispute the importance of this, absolutely. Whichever side of the argument we're on, it's really important we get this right.
Fine, thank you. Well, can I now thank our guests for attending today?
Thank you.
And for the answers to our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report, the discussion and the report from MOPAC attached at Appendix 1 to the report? Thank you. Agenda item 7, Police Crime Committee Work Programme. Can I ask the committee to note the progress in our work programme as set out in the report? Thank you. Date of the next meeting is on Wednesday, 18th of March at 10 a.m. in Committee Room 5, City Hall. And before I close the meeting, I do believe that this is your last meeting as Member of Dispo.
It is.
So I would like to record it to thank you for all the work you've done
Absolutely.
through this committee, on this committee.
Sorry, is this the last session?
No.
I'm going to.
No, and also this important record, it may be the case, that it may be the last committee meeting for Assemblyman O'Connell.
Okay.
And if that is the case, to record our deep thanks for all the work that he did as chair and as a member of this committee, and personally also all the support and guidance he's given me. He may be here, may not be here on the 18th of March, but I know you won't be here, Andrew. So on that note, there's no other urgent business, so I close the meeting.